Imagine living each day feeling calm, grounded, and completely at peace with who you are. Imagine carrying a quiet confidence in your heart, knowing that no matter what happens around you, you are whole on the inside. But tell me the truth, how many times have you felt lost, broken, or like a part of you is missing? We go through life chasing goals, chasing people, chasing validation, hoping it will finally make us feel complete. But it never does, because wholeness isn't something we find out there. It's something we gently remember, deep within ourselves. The way you speak to yourself, the way you treat your own heart, defines how you experience life. If you move through your day with softness, with compassion, with wisdom, you feel strong, even in silence. But if you keep judging yourself, rushing, trying to be someone you're not, then even your best days will feel empty. Today, you're going to discover the most gentle teachings that can help you feel whole again. These aren't just nice ideas. They are ancient truths that heal, calm, and bring you back to yourself. So get ready, because after this, the way you treat your mind and your heart will never be the same again. Before we start, I want you to make a promise to yourself. Write in the comments, "I choose peace." You're not just writing a sentence, you're planting a seed of healing, of self-love, of quiet strength. The more you repeat it, the more it grows. So write it down now, and let's begin. Let's be honest, there are moments when you lie awake at night, not because you're not tired, but because your mind doesn't know how to stop. Thoughts tumble over one another like waves that don't know when to rest. It's not loud or dramatic, it's subtle, like a tension behind the eyes or a tightening in the chest that no one sees. Most people think the answer is to try harder, meditate harder, relax harder, force peace into the body like pushing a river to flow the other way. But deep down, you know that force has never really worked. The more pressure you apply, the more distant peace becomes. There's a gentler way, a quieter way, a path where you don't have to fight to be okay. This is what soft awareness offers, a way of being with your mind and body that doesn't demand anything, but gently invites everything. Soft awareness begins when you stop treating your attention like a spotlight and start treating it like a warm light in a quiet room. You're not watching your thoughts like a guard on duty. You're simply being with them, without trying to fix or push them away. That small shift from controlling to allowing starts to change the way your nervous system behaves. Neuroscientists have found that when you observe your thoughts without judgment, without trying to control them, the brain begins to rewire itself. The default mode network responsible for rumination, overthinking, self-comparison starts to quiet down. It's not magic, it's biology. The more you rest in open awareness, the more your brain learns that it's safe to let go. But soft awareness isn't laziness. It's not zoning out. It's active in a quiet way, like holding a child who's been crying for hours, not because you have a solution, but because your presence is enough. When you turn this kind of presence inward, you meet parts of yourself that you've ignored for years. The thought patterns you've fought against, the emotions you've labeled as too much, even the stories you carry about not being good enough. When you stop resisting them and just notice them, they begin to lose power, not because you shut them down, but because you stopped feeding them energy through fear. Awareness that doesn't cling or reject becomes healing on its own. Buddhist teachings have long spoken of this. In Satipatthana, 4 Foundations of Mindfulness, the invitation is not to control the mind, but to notice the body, feelings, mind, states, and mental objects with clarity and kindness. That word kindness changes everything. Mindfulness is not a weapon. It's not there to silence your inner world. It's there to welcome it with understanding. Let's start with the body. So many people try to escape the body, They use it like a tool but live mostly in their heads. The body holds a record of everything you've lived through. But when you bring soft awareness to the breath, to the warmth in your hands, to the tightness in your chest, you're telling the body, I see you. You can stop bracing now. The breath becomes a gateway. Not because you need to breathe in a perfect way, but because the breath is always here. And when you follow it softly, not rigidly, it shows you that the present moment can carry you without effort. Each breath says, you don't need to do anything right now. Then there are feelings. Some people avoid them. Others drown in them. But there is a third way. Stay with them gently. Not analyzing, not fixing, not labeling. Just sensing. Feelings rise and fall when you give them space. And when you don't name them as good or bad, something shifts. You begin to see that even sadness, even fear, are just visitors. Soft awareness lets feelings pass without turning them into identities. You're no longer an anxious person. You're a person feeling a moment of anxiety, and soon it moves on like a cloud that never meant to stay. The mind itself can be the trickiest. It loves to plan, compare, criticize, fantasize. But when you see those thoughts without grabbing onto them, something beautiful happens. Thoughts become just thoughts. You're not in them, you're aware of them. And here's something that most people miss. When you don't fight the thought, it loses its stickiness. It doesn't pull you in like quicksand. Soft awareness creates distance. Not a cold distance, but a kind one, like watching a leaf float past on a stream. Now this doesn't mean you'll never get caught up again. You will. We all do. But when your habit becomes returning to gentle noticing, the mind begins to trust that it doesn't need to scream to be heard. Satipatthana also teaches awareness of Dhamma mental objects or teachings. This means noticing when the 5 hindrances show up: craving, aversion, restlessness, sleepiness, and doubt. But here's where softness matters again. You're not supposed to fight the hindrances. That just creates more tension. You notice them. Ah, restlessness is here. And that's it. You don't need to make it go away. Just by naming it softly without shame, you disarm it. It's like a spotlight turns into candlelight. The mind becomes less reactive, more curious. Curiosity is a powerful friend to soft awareness. When you're curious, you're open. You're not judging, you're exploring. And when you explore your inner world with gentleness, you find something surprising. You're not broken, you're just layered. Layers of belief, layers of fear, layers of habits you picked up to survive. But underneath all that, stillness, wholeness, awareness that never left you, just got buried. People often ask, how do I stay mindful all day? But the better question is, how do I return again and again without beating myself up for forgetting? That's where real change begins. Not in perfection, but in the softness of return. Let's talk about the nervous system for a moment. When you're in a constant state of doing, solving, achieving, your system stays in fight or flight. You might not notice it, but your body does. Muscles stay tight, breathing gets shallow, sleep becomes difficult. But when you rest in soft awareness, you activate something called the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural healing mode. Heart rate slows, breath deepens, digestion improves, and your body starts to remember what safety feels like. This isn't about deep meditation or silent retreats. It's about how you relate to this moment, right now. Can you notice the texture of your shirt against your skin? Can you feel your jaw and let it relax just a little? Can you let your next breath come to you instead of pulling it in? That's soft awareness. One of the most powerful aspects of this practice is how it begins to dissolve inner judgment. You stop labeling thoughts as good or bad. You stop criticizing yourself for not doing enough. You just notice. And in that noticing, healing happens. Compassion grows in silence, and when you stop fighting yourself, you begin to see others differently too. That person who irritates you, they're caught in their own storm. You don't excuse their behavior, but you don't take it personally either. Your awareness becomes less sharp, more spacious. This kind of presence changes relationships. You start listening more than fixing. You pause before reacting. You speak more slowly, with less urgency, because you're not trying to prove anything anymore. You're just being here. Soft awareness also invites surrender, but not the kind where you give up. The kind where you let go of needing to control every detail. You start to trust that things unfold, that clarity comes, that emotions pass. This doesn't mean you become passive. On the contrary, when you stop wasting energy on control, you have more energy to take wise action, action from a calm center, not from panic. You begin to discover a rhythm in your life that isn't based on pressure. You move when it's time to move. You rest when it's time to rest. You listen to the body. You honor the heart. And something else begins to shift. Your relationship with discomfort. Pain, whether physical or emotional, used to be something to avoid. Now it becomes something to stay with, not because you enjoy it, but because you're no longer afraid of it. You learn to hold pain the way you'd hold a frightened child, not pushing it away, not letting it take over, but simply being with it until it softens. This kind of practice gives you resilience, and not the hard kind that pushes through everything, but the soft kind that bends without breaking. It also brings joy, not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet kind that bubbles up when nothing is missing, when you're sipping tea and you realize you're truly there. That's the gift of soft awareness. The world tells you to hustle, to be productive, to prove your worth. But the deepest truths aren't found in effort. They're found in stillness, in breath, in presence. You don't need to be better. You just need to be here. And that's where this journey leads. Not to a new version of you, but to the real you, the one who was never lost, just waiting for you to notice. So tonight, as your head touches the pillow, don't try to meditate. Don't try to be mindful. Just feel the warmth of the blanket, the weight of your body, the kindness in your breath. Let your awareness be soft. Let it hold you. Let it carry you home. Even the quietest kind of peace can feel incomplete when you've learned to leave parts of yourself behind. You may carry calm in your breath, softness in your awareness, and still feel like something is missing, like a room in your inner house remains locked. There is a reason. Soft awareness opens the door, yes. But who you welcome inside is what completes the journey. That's where we go now, not just into presence, but into love. Not love in theory, not love as a performance, but the kind of love you once needed and never received. The kind you owe yourself. Somewhere along the way, you learned to split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable, to present only the parts others liked, the smiling, capable, responsible version. The one who doesn't cry too much, who doesn't take up space, who always puts others first. You became so good at it, you forgot you were doing it. The parts you pushed away didn't die. They simply went quiet. The Buddhist practice of metta, or loving kindness, is not just about sending good wishes to strangers or loved ones. It's about turning toward the places within you that you've learned to avoid, that you labeled too sensitive, too angry, too needy, too much. Metta is not a concept, it's a practice. It's what happens when you sit with the part of you that still carries the bruise of childhood rejection. The version of you who was told they weren't smart enough, pretty enough, tough enough. It's when you stop trying to fix that part and start listening to it. This work begins with acknowledgement. Most of us walk around numb to our own self-rejection. It hides behind achievement, behind self-help, behind overthinking. It says things like, "I just want to improve," or "I should be over this by now." But metta is not self-improvement, it's self-returning. It's saying to those quiet corners of your being, "You are welcome here, even now, especially now." You begin not by feeling love, but by intending it. That's the secret. Metta is not about feeling warm or emotional. It's about planting the seed seven when the soil feels dry. You say the phrases not because you already believe them, but because you are learning how to believe them. May I be safe. May I be well. May I be happy. May I live with ease. You start there, slowly, gently. Sometimes you'll feel resistance. That's part of the process. You've trained your mind for years to believe it must earn love. You've whispered cruel things to yourself that you would never say to someone else. Undoing that takes time and patience. The purpose of this practice is not to create fake happiness. It's to bring compassion to what is already here. If you feel sadness, let the wish for safety hold it. If you feel anger, let the wish for ease cradle it. You don't need to clean yourself up before offering kindness. That's the whole point. Every time you repeat the phrases, you're creating new mental grooves. You're teaching your brain that it's safe to care for yourself. Over time, your nervous system begins to relax. Not because you forced it, but because kindness makes the body feel safe. This work can awaken long-forgotten memories. You may feel tears and not know why. You may feel nothing at all. Both are welcome. The goal is not to chase a feeling, but to stay present. You're not trying to replace sadness with love. You're trying to meet sadness with love. That's different. One is rejection, the other is reconciliation. Loving kindness also transforms how you speak to yourself. The inner critic thrives in silence. It repeats old scripts from parents, teachers, or peers, scripts you never agreed to, but learned to obey. When you start offering kindness, the critic gets quieter, not because it's defeated, but because it's finally heard. The inner critic, too, is a wounded part, often scared, often trying to protect you. When you say, "May I be kind to myself," you're including the critic too. You begin to build a new inner language, not fake positivity, but truthful care. You say things like, "This is hard, and I'm doing my best." Or, "I don't have to be perfect to be worthy." Or even just, "I'm allowed to be tired." These are not slogans, they're lifelines. Metta brings you face to face with abandonment, not just by others, but the ways you abandoned yourself, the hobbies you gave up to please someone else, the boundaries you never set, the voice you silenced to keep the peace. This practice doesn't shame you for those choices, it understands them, but it also invites you to return. What would it mean to offer kindness to the version of you who never felt chosen? It might mean writing a letter to your younger self, not to fix the past, but to acknowledge it. It might mean standing in front of the mirror and saying the phrases out loud, even if your voice shakes. It might mean simply placing a hand on your heart when you feel alone. Small gestures, quiet revolutions. Loving kindness is not just for the mind, it's for the body too. The body that's carried tension for years, that's held its breath waiting for permission to rest, that's been punished with overwork or neglected in silence. You can practice metta with movement. When you stretch in the morning, do it with care, not force. When you eat, let it be nourishment, not reward or punishment. When you bathe, let the water be a reminder, I am worth tending to. Metta is not about waiting to feel whole. It's about treating yourself as if you are whole and letting the truth of that rise to the surface over time. This practice also ripples outward. When you've truly faced your own pain with love, you begin to see others differently. Their anger no longer feels threatening. Their distance no longer feels personal. You recognize the hurt beneath their actions. This doesn't mean you excuse bad behavior. but you respond, not react. That's a powerful shift. Boundaries created through metta are stronger than walls built from fear. You say no, not because you're angry, but because you value your peace. You walk away, not because you're cold, but because you've finally returned to yourself. Even joy becomes more accessible, not the kind you chase, but the kind you notice. The warmth of the sun on your face, the quiet of an early morning, the smile that rises for no reason. When you're not rejecting yourself, life feels less heavy. There will be days when the practice feels far away, days when you fall back into old habits of criticism or neglect. That's okay. The measure of metta is not in perfection, it's in how you return. You return like a parent who never stopped waiting, like a friend who never gave up hope. And slowly, the parts of you that were once exiled begin to trust again. They step forward, they speak, they ask for what they need, and you listen. Because now you know, loving kindness is not indulgence, it's liberation. You don't become lazy, you become alive. You don't lose your edge, you lose your self-hate. You don't float away, you come home. You begin to live from a center that is unshakable, because life stops being hard, but because you stop being hard on yourself. That's the power of metta. It doesn't shout, it doesn't perform, it doesn't rush. It waits, it returns, it heals. And so do you. There's a moment right after the kindness has been offered, after the tears have softened, after the old voices inside have been heard, where something quiet settles. It's not a conclusion, it's not a solution. It's just a stillness that holds everything without asking for anything to change. This stillness is not empty, it's full of presence. And in this next step of the journey, we turn our attention toward this subtle but powerful space. A space where nothing is forced, and yet everything is met. Where your nervous system remembers how to rest without permission. This is the sacred pause. The pause is not about stopping everything. It's not an escape. It's not zoning out or disconnecting from life. It's the opposite. The pause is when you choose to step back, not to avoid, but to reconnect. It is a radical act of wholeness. In the Mahayana tradition, the practice of compassion begins with knowing how to stop running, fixing, analyzing, solving just long enough to feel what is truly here. Modern life teaches you to respond instantly, to text back, answer quickly, decide fast, keep moving. But underneath that constant motion, your body is quietly asking, can we breathe? Can we slow down long enough to feel safe again? The sacred pause offers that breath. It offers a break in the loop, not the kind of break where you distract yourself with screens or background noise, but the kind where you become still enough to hear yourself again, still enough to feel your own aliveness. In nervous system terms, this pause helps reset the stress response. When you're constantly stimulated by fear, pressure, responsibility, your body stays in a sympathetic state. The heart races. The muscles stay braced. Digestion slows. But when you pause with awareness, you activate the parasympathetic state. The body begins to repair. You return to a place of balance. But this can't be forced. You don't say to your body, calm down now. You don't push your mind into silence. Instead, you gently step out of the momentum. You let the nervous system slow down naturally, like a spinning top coming to rest. This is why compassion practices in Mahayana Buddhism begin with grounding. Before offering care to anyone else, the bodhisattva learns to sit, to breathe, to sense. The pause isn't separate from compassion, it is compassion. Because when you pause, you stop reacting from fear. You stop projecting old pain onto new situations. You begin to respond from presence. And presence is not neutral. It carries warmth. It carries clarity. But most of all, it carries the energy of enough. The pause says, Nothing more is needed right now, just this. This moment of stillness does something subtle. It interrupts the cycle of self-rejection. When you pause, you're no longer running from discomfort or grasping at relief. You are saying, I am here, even if it's messy, even if I don't know what comes next. That kind of self-contact is healing in itself. The sacred pause is also a doorway. It lets you see what's underneath the noise. Sometimes that means grief, or old fear, or unprocessed anger. These emotions don't surface to harm you. They surface because for the first time there is enough stillness for them to be heard, and heard gently. This is where nervous system healing becomes spiritual practice. You're not just managing symptoms, you're welcoming what was pushed away. You're telling your body and heart, you don't have to hide anymore. And slowly the layers begin to unwind. But it's important to say, the pause is not always comfortable. Stillness can be confronting. For someone who's learned to cope by staying busy, stillness may feel like drowning. That's why the sacred pause must be approached with respect, not demand. You ease into it, you learn its language. One of the most powerful tools in this practice is noticing. Noticing when you're speeding up, when you're holding your breath, when your shoulders are creeping up. These are signs that you've left yourself. The pause is the gentle invitation to return, to your breath, to your body, to your heart. And this return doesn't need to take hours. Sometimes a pause is 3 deep breaths. Sometimes it's placing your hand on your chest before you respond. Sometimes it's saying, let me think about that, instead of answering out of pressure. These are small acts, but their impact is deep. Because the pause is not a technique, it's a relationship. You are learning to relate to yourself without urgency, without demand. You're learning to trust that nothing breaks if you stop for a moment. That not everything needs to be solved instantly. That your worth is not in your speed. This practice is also about boundaries, not as rigid walls, but as gentle lines that protect your energy. The sacred pause teaches you to wait before saying yes, to feel into decisions, to check if your body is bracing or opening. You stop being ruled by obligation and start listening for what is true. And in that listening, something opens. The inner wisdom that was always there but drowned out by noise begins to speak. You begin to act from alignment instead of reaction, from truth instead of habit. In Mahayana compassion training, this is known as skillful means. Pausing before acting allows compassion to be skillful, not impulsive. Without the pause, you may give when you're depleted, speak when it's not time, or try to fix what isn't yours to carry. But with the pause, you become attuned. Compassion flows where it's needed, without draining you. This also changes how you receive life. When something difficult arises, a challenge, a conversation, a mistake, the pause gives space before judgment. You're not reacting from old patterns. You're meeting the moment with clarity. This makes room for forgiveness, for understanding, even for humor. It also makes room for your body's rhythm. Many people live out of sync with their natural energy cycles. They push through fatigue, override hunger, ignore pain. The pause helps you listen again. You begin to recognize when your body says rest, when it says move, when it says enough. And over time, this creates deep trust within. Trust that you will not abandon yourself in the name of productivity. Trust that your inner world matters. Trust that rest is not failure, it is wisdom. One of the most beautiful things about this practice is its simplicity. You don't need a special setting, you don't need perfect circumstances, you just need a moment. Even in a busy room, you can pause. Even in the middle of conflict, you can pause. The breath is always there, waiting to be remembered. This doesn't mean you detach from life. On the contrary, the pause connects you more deeply. When you stop for a moment, you see more clearly. The color of the sky, the tone in someone's voice, the tightness in your own jaw, these are the things that reconnect you to the present. The sacred pause is also an act of reverence for life, for your nervous system, for the quiet intelligence that lives beneath the surface. You begin to realize that rushing is often fear in disguise, and that stillness is not emptiness, but space for meaning to rise. As you practice pausing more often, you might begin to feel emotions that surprise you. Grief that never had time to land, joy that was too subtle to notice before. These moments teach you that your inner life is richer than you thought. That stillness is not boring, it's alive. The body begins to respond, sleep improves, the breath deepens, digestion stabilizes. But more than that, your relationship to yourself softens. You stop needing to get somewhere all the time. You realize, this moment, exactly as it is enough to begin again. And that's the hidden wisdom of the sacred pause. It teaches you how to begin again, not from failure, but from kindness. Each time you pause, you return to yourself. Each time you return, you remember that you are whole or not because everything is perfect, but because you are present. You don't have to live in high alert. You don't have to earn your peace. You just need to stop for long enough to remember, you are here, you are breathing, and that's enough for now. Let it be enough. And let this pause, right here, right now, hold you. Somewhere between the stillness and the return, a question rises quietly. If I pause long enough to hear myself, what will I do with what I find? Not everything inside feels calm or kind. Under the surface of breath and presence, old voices, still echo voices that criticize, pressure, doubt, and demand. There is a sharpness within that doesn't go away with silence alone. It softens for a moment, then comes back. This is where many people stop, afraid of what lives beneath, but this is also where the real healing begins. The next step is not about silence or stillness. It's about relationship. How do you relate to the parts of you that hurt you? How do you speak to the voice in your mind that calls you lazy, weak, broken? The answer lies in a forgotten practice, one that is more known for how we treat others, but most powerful when turned inward. Ahimsa. Non-violence. Ahimsa is not only about what you don't do. It's not simply refusing to harm someone else. It's a posture of the heart. It's about choosing to respond with gentleness even when pain arises, especially when it arises inside you. This is where most inner violence begins, not from malice, but from habit. From years of thinking that being hard on yourself is necessary to grow, to improve, to become better. Many people think the inner critic is useful, that without it, they'll collapse into laziness or weakness. But the truth is, fear-based self-discipline only leads to burnout, to disconnection, to anxiety that never fully goes away. Ahimsa offers another path: discipline without violence, accountability without shame, growth without attack. To understand how this works, you have to see what inner violence actually looks like. It's not always loud. Sometimes it sounds like constant pressure. Sometimes it's the inability to rest without guilt. It's the voice that says, you're not trying hard enough, even when you're exhausted. It's comparing yourself to others, not out of inspiration, but to prove your own inadequacy. That's inner violence, and it fragments you. It separates you from your worth. It splits your mind into attacker and attacked, and over time that division wears you down. Ahimsa starts by witnessing this dynamic with clarity, not blame. You begin to notice when the voice of inner harm shows up, and instead of believing it, you question it. Where did this voice come from? Who taught me that I had to be perfect to be loved? You don't fight the voice. Fighting only creates more division. You observe it the way you'd observe a scared child throwing a tantrum, with understanding, with patience, with a soft boundary that says, "You're not in charge anymore." This begins the process of self-reconciliation. You are not trying to silence the voice. You are trying to meet the fear beneath it. Because every harsh inner narrative comes from a deeper wound, from a moment when you were hurt, humiliated, abandoned, or shamed, and your mind created a rule to protect you. If I'm always perfect, I won't be rejected again. If I push myself hard enough, I'll never feel useless. But the mind doesn't know when to let go of old rules, so they keep running, long after the danger is gone. Ahimsa is the practice of telling your system, the danger is over, you're safe now. You don't have to hurt yourself to stay afloat. You begin to replace the attack with curiosity. Instead of saying, "What's wrong with me?" you ask, "What do I need right now?" Instead of pushing through fatigue, you ask, "Can I give myself rest and still respect myself?" These small questions change the chemistry of the brain. They move you out of threat mode and into connection. The nervous system begins to trust again. This is not weakness, this is inner strength, because it takes strength to interrupt cycles that were taught to you so early you didn't even realize they were optional. Ahimsa also means meeting your emotions without weaponizing them. Anger doesn't make you bad. Sadness doesn't make you broken. Fear doesn't make you weak. But when these emotions arise, and the first thing you do is judge them, you add a second layer of pain. The emotion hurts, but the judgment isolates. Ahimsa teaches you to say, "This feeling is here. I don't need to like it, but I don't have to punish myself for it either." In this space, self-compassion becomes something deeper than comfort. It becomes protection. It becomes your boundary against self-harm, emotional, mental, and even physical. One of the hidden ways inner violence shows up is through perfectionism, the constant striving to be flawless, to avoid mistakes, to always be ahead. On the surface, it looks like discipline, but underneath, it's fear. Fear of being seen as weak, fear of being exposed, fear of disappointing others. Ahimsa gently exposes this fear, not to mock it, but to heal it. You begin to question the story. What if I'm enough even when I fail? What if I'm lovable even when I disappoint someone? These aren't affirmations, they're inquiries. Questions that pierce through illusion and let softness enter. And this softness does not mean passivity. On the contrary, people who practice non-violence toward themselves actually become more motivated, because their energy is no longer tied up in defending, pretending, or recovering from self-attack. They can use that energy to act, to grow, to contribute without betraying themselves in the process. Ahimsa also touches how we handle regret. We all have moments we're not proud of, things we said, choices we made, times we gave up on ourselves. Inner violence holds on to these moments like weapons. You'll never change. You always mess it up. But self-reconciliation holds these memories like pages in a story. You turn them gently. You see the pain. You feel the impact. But you also allow for growth. Not denial, not erasure, but growth. You might write a letter to your past self, not to excuse, but to understand. You might apologize inwardly to someone you can't reach anymore, not as punishment, but as a way of restoring integrity. These acts of truth are how inner peace begins to return. Ahimsa also means creating space for uncertainty. Most inner conflict comes from trying to control outcomes. The unknown feels threatening, so the mind scrambles for plans, predictions, rehearsals. And when it can't find certainty, it turns that anxiety inward. You start blaming yourself for not knowing what to do. Nonviolence allows you to say, "I don't know," and that's okay for now. That small permission releases the grip. It lets you meet uncertainty with presence instead of panic. This practice reaches deep into your language too. Notice how often you say things like, "I'm so stupid," or "I always ruin things." These phrases aren't harmless. They reinforce an identity built on harm. Begin replacing them with truth. "That was hard and I'm learning." "I made a mistake, but I'm not a mistake." These aren't feel-good lines. They are medicine. They realign your inner narrative with honesty and kindness at the same time. Ahimsa also teaches you to notice how you handle success. Many people feel guilty for resting or celebrating. They downplay their wins. They fear pride. But this too is a form of harm. You deserve to enjoy your life. You are allowed to feel joy without waiting for it to be taken away. Every moment of celebration is an antidote to a lifetime of self-denial. Allowing yourself to thrive without apology is part of non-violence. It says, "I will no longer punish myself for being human or for being happy." This practice does not mean you never feel anger or frustration or grief. Those are part of being alive. Ahimsa doesn't erase emotion, it honors it, but it refuses to turn emotion into punishment. You can feel anger without becoming cruel. You can feel sorrow without calling yourself broken. You can feel desire without naming it wrong. This is the path of integration. Because in the end, Ahimsa is not a performance. It's not about being nice. It's about becoming whole. When you stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable, good and bad, worthy and unworthy, you return to your true form. And your true form is not perfect. It is full, changing, real. This is what ends inner fragmentation. Not fixing, not suppressing, but witnessing with love, speaking with care, choosing kindness again and again until the habit of harm begins to unravel. You might start small. A pause before you speak to yourself, a hand on your chest in a moment of panic, a gentle reminder that growth is not linear. These are not grand acts, but they are sacred, because they are how you reclaim your dignity, how you step out of old cycles, how you stop passing on the harm that was passed to you. And that is where healing becomes legacy. Not just for you, but for everyone you touch. The world doesn't need more people pretending to be perfect. It needs more people who have made peace with themselves. So the next time your inner voice turns sharp, pause, listen, breathe. Then answer with the words that maybe no one ever said to you, but you now know how to say, "You're doing your best." And that's enough for now. Let those words be the beginning of a new relationship with yourself, with your story, with the world. And let Ahimsa be the path that holds it all together. After the harshness begins to dissolve, after the sharp voices inside start softening under your steady care, a deeper question rises in the stillness. If I am not the judgments I believed, not the failures I feared, not even the stories I carried, then what am I? When you stop fighting yourself, what's left? This is not a crisis. This is the doorway. You are not disappearing. You are beginning to touch something sacred and vast. This is where we meet the teaching that many misunderstand, but that holds a kind of quiet liberation that can change everything. Shunyata, emptiness. This isn't the emptiness that wounds or isolates. This isn't numbness or despair. This is the emptiness that frees. It is not a void but a space, not a lack but a release. It doesn't strip you of meaning, it reveals that meaning was never trapped in fixed form to begin with. When the Buddhists speak of emptiness, they are not pointing to nothing. They are pointing to the freedom of not being held hostage by identity, story, or illusion. This teaching can be uncomfortable at first, because the mind is trained to grasp. It wants solid ground, a clear label, something that says, "I am this, that is that." But what if everything you experience, including yourself, is not as solid as it seems? What if everything is shaped by conditions, changing moment to moment? That might sound unsettling, but it's actually the key to your peace. When something is empty of fixed essence, it can move, it can shift, it can breathe. The self that once felt locked into a certain role, a certain wound, a certain outcome, that self begins to open. You are no longer the angry one, the broken one, the anxious one. You are experiencing anger, you are meeting pain, you are walking through fear. But none of these states define you. They appear, they pass, and you remain, but not as a thing, as awareness itself. Emptiness helps you stop clinging to every thought, every feeling, every label as the truth. It lets you loosen your grip, not to detach from life, but to engage with it more clearly. You begin to see that what you called me is not a fixed object, but a flowing process. A dance of breath, thought, memory, sensation, perception, and intentional changing, all conditioned, all connected. This realization brings relief, because so much suffering comes from trying to hold together a solid identity. You try to be consistent, to meet expectations, to protect your image, to fit your past decisions. But in emptiness, you don't have to keep up an act. You don't have to get everything right. You don't have to defend an old version of yourself. You can just meet the moment with presence. Even the pain you feel, when looked at closely, is not a permanent thing. It's sensations, reactions, beliefs. And each part depends on something else to exist. This means pain is workable. It's not your essence. It's a visitor with causes and conditions. Emptiness shows you where the door is. This does not mean life is meaningless. It means meaning is not fixed. It's not handed to you from outside. It arises freshly, through presence, through relationship, through action. When you stop looking for meaning in static forms, you start finding it in simple things, in a breath, in a kind word, in a choice not to react. Understanding emptiness also changes how you hold your past. The mistakes you made, the wounds you received, the roles you played, they all seemed so solid, but they too were impermanent. When you see that those moments were shaped by conditions, by fear, by confusion, by environment, you begin to hold them with compassion, not as facts about who you are, but as steps on a path you're still walking. Even trauma, which leaves deep marks, is not your identity. It's something that happened, something that echoes, but not something that owns you. In emptiness, you find space between the event and the self. You can heal without needing to erase the past or rewrite history. You can simply release your grip. This spaciousness brings a kind of humility that is gentle, not belittling. You no longer feel the need to be right all the time. You no longer define yourself by your opinions. You can say, "I don't know," without shame. You can learn without defending. You can listen without waiting to respond, because the self is no longer a fortress to guard, it's a window to open. The idea that nothing has an independent, permanent essence is not cold, it's warm, with interdependence. If you are not separate, then you are always connected. Every thought shaped by culture, every feeling shaped by relationship, every part of you shaped by causes you didn't choose but which you can now influence, through awareness, through care, through wise action. This is the doorway to compassion. When you see yourself as a changing process, you begin to see others that way too. That person who hurt you, also shaped by causes. That person who frustrates you, also a flow, not a fixed being. This doesn't mean you excuse harm. It means you stop seeing people as static. It means you allow room for change, for others and for yourself. Shunyata also teaches you how to release craving, not through repression, but through insight. You want things because you believe they will make you real, secure, fulfilled. But if the self that craves is not solid, then what you crave won't complete it. You can still enjoy things. You can still feel desire, But you no longer believe your wholeness depends on getting what you want. This makes your joy more available, less dependent, less fragile. You can feel contentment not because everything is perfect, but because you've stopped grasping at perfection. You are resting in what is open, shifting, alive. Even your spiritual path is not exempt. Emptiness reminds you not to cling to progress, not to make enlightenment into another identity. You're not becoming someone else. You're learning how to stop pretending you were ever separate. Every insight is just a reflection in an open sky. There's a simplicity in all this that cannot be faked. When you feel it, you move through the world with less resistance. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need to hold grudges. You don't need to chase validation. You don't need to build a personality that impresses everyone. You just breathe. You just show up. And what remains, when the old masks fall away? Not nothing, clarity, peace, openness. The kind of presence that can hold anything without collapsing. This is not a belief, it's a seeing, something you feel in your bones. The old idea of self becomes lighter, and with that lightness comes freedom. You begin to make choices from stillness, not fear. You begin to relate without losing yourself. You begin to feel whole, not because you are finished, but because you are no longer pretending to be solid. Emptiness also transforms how you work with thoughts. Thoughts are not problems. They're events, temporary, conditioned. When you see them as empty, you stop arguing with them. You let them arise and pass. This breaks the cycle of rumination. You gain energy by not holding every thought so tightly. Even emotions, when viewed through the lens of emptiness, become more manageable. Sadness doesn't define you. Anger doesn't own you. Joy doesn't need to be clung to. Each feeling, just like a wave, rises and falls empty of permanence, but full of experience. You are not the wave. You are the ocean that holds it. This view helps you release attachment not by force, but through understanding. The things you grasp at, whether status, security, or approval, no longer hold the same grip when you see they too are empty. This does not make you cold. It makes you wise. You still care. But your care is no longer laced with desperation. And when things fall apart, as they sometimes do, you don't fall with them. You feel the pain. You honor the loss. But you don't lose yourself, because the self was never a possession. It was always an unfolding. This gives you resilience, not through armor, but through spaciousness. Shunyata also protects you from spiritual pride. It reminds you that the path is not about becoming special. It's about dissolving what was never true. The ego that wants to be awakened, recognized, praised this too, is empty. You smile at it, you bow to it, but you don't believe it anymore. This is where real humility is born. The humility that comes not from shame, but from wonder. You don't need to stand out. You just need to show up fully, empty of self-importance, full of presence. And what about meaning? If everything is empty, where does meaning come from? It arises, moment by moment, through connection, intention, and love. Not fixed, but alive. You don't chase it, you create it. Through your attention, through your choices, through your willingness to meet life without needing to hold it. This is the freedom emptiness offers. Not detachment, but depth. Not apathy, but intimacy. You see more because you cling less. You love more because you grasp less. You suffer less because you resist less. Shunyata is not a concept to master. It is a space to enter. A gentle loosening, a return to the fluid nature of everything, including you. And when you let yourself dissolve into that spaciousness, not to disappear, but to become real, you may find a peace that doesn't depend on anything, a clarity that holds everything, a wholeness that doesn't need to be proved. Nothing has to be missing. Nothing has to be added. You are already home, because the one who was searching was never separate from the space they sought. And that space open, kind, ungraspably is always here, waiting without waiting, empty, full, free. When the weight of needing to hold everything together begins to fall away, and you're no longer trying to become someone solid just to feel safe, what begins to rise is not emptiness in the way you feared. What rises is softness, an openness that feels like truth, but not the kind that overwhelms or breaks you. It feels like something you always knew but had no words for. In that quiet return, you may notice something vulnerable surfacing, not weakness but a part of you that never had the chance to be fully seen. The one who once hoped without hesitation, the one who absorbed shame before they knew how to speak, the one who learned to hide to stay safe. That part is not gone. It has been waiting for the moment you could meet it without fear. This is the sacred re-entry. This is where reparenting begins, not with control, but with care, not with fixing, but with recognition. Reparenting the inner child isn't about returning to the past to change what happened. It's about being present now in a way you never had before. It's about bringing into this moment the kind of presence that your younger self needed but didn't receive. And it's not something you imagine abstractly. It becomes a real relationship inside you. The Yogacara tradition describes Tathagatagarbhathe Buddha Naturas, something innate in all beings. This isn't a concept. It's a direct recognition that beneath the layers of fear, coping, and conditioning, there is a quality of clarity, compassion, and wisdom already present. Not something you build, but something you uncover. It means your worth was never in question. Not when you were 5, not when you made mistakes, not even now. This is where reparenting and Buddha nature meet. You aren't just comforting your inner child, you're restoring their reflection in truth. In most of us, that child was shaped by early patterns of protection. Maybe it learned to stay quiet to avoid conflict. Maybe it became helpful to earn affection. Maybe it became invisible to avoid harm. These patterns were intelligent at the time, but when left unquestioned, they continue to direct adult behavior long after they're useful. Gentle reparenting means you stop judging those survival responses and begin to understand them. It's the practice of becoming the adult, your younger self, needed not perfect, not always certain, but kind, present, and attuned. You begin by noticing what activates the child in you. It might be a harsh tone, a perceived rejection, or being ignored. These moments are not signs of regression, they are invitations. Invitations to turn toward, not away. When you feel small, unworthy, or ashamed, you're often reliving a moment where love was withdrawn or replaced by pressure. The adult part of you may try to move past it, rationalize it, or distract from it. But the child part needs acknowledgement. Instead of silencing it, you learn to listen, not with words alone, but with attention. What does this part need right now? Sometimes it's reassurance. Sometimes it needs permission to be angry or scared. Sometimes it just needs to be held in awareness without being told to get over it. Reparenting through the lens of Buddha nature is unique because it doesn't treat the inner child as damaged. It recognizes that even the wounded parts carry clarity, that your longing for connection, your sensitivity, your instincts for truth, those were never flaws. They were signs of life, of consciousness alive and reaching. So healing doesn't mean turning the child into something else. It means creating the conditions for their natural innocence to resurface. Not naive innocence, but the kind that sees clearly and loves anyway. This process can be supported through practice. One simple way is inner dialogue, not forced affirmations, but honest check-ins. You might close your eyes and speak to that part directly. I see you. I hear what you're afraid of. You're safe with me now. Over time, this begins to feel less awkward and more natural. Because you are not creating something new, you are repairing a connection that was interrupted. Another powerful support is visualization. Not escape, but repair. You might picture a safe place where the child is free to rest, to speak, to play. A place that has never been touched by judgment. You may imagine your adult self walking into that space and offering presence, not instruction. It's not about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about allowing a new kind of memory to grow. The nervous system can begin to believe in safety again. It can learn that support is possible. That protection doesn't have to come through tension. Embodiment also matters here. The inner child lives in the body more than in thoughts. A tight belly, a collapsed posture, a clenched jaw, these are often the child's voice. Reparenting means checking in with your physical state, placing a hand over your heart, letting the breath deepen, giving your body the signal, we're not in danger now. Consistency is key, not perfection. The child doesn't need a flawless parent. It needs a reliable one who shows up even after forgetting, who doesn't leave when things get messy. The more you return to this relationship, the more trust builds inside you. Some people fear that reparenting will make them soft, weak, or overly emotional, but the truth is, it creates resilience. Not the brittle kind that endures everything in silence, but the flexible kind that knows how to rest, how to speak, how to say no. When the child inside feels safe, the adult can move through the world with more freedom. This also changes how you relate to others. You become less reactive, less needy, less guarded, because you are no longer outsourcing your self-worth to other people. You're meeting your own needs with compassion. And from that place, relationships become more honest, more rooted, more spacious. The practice of recognizing Buddha nature also prevents spiritual bypassing. You don't skip the pain, you don't deny the trauma, but you stop making it your core identity. You hold both truths. This happened, and it hurt, and this is not the whole of who I am. You can be in pain and still be pure. You can carry scars and still radiate wisdom. The inner child knows this before anyone taught it otherwise. It was only over time, through comparison and criticism, that you started to doubt it. The more you stay close to this part of you, the more your adult choices begin to align with truth, not fear. You stop chasing validation. You stop trying to perform healing. You begin to live with a quiet integrity, a life that feels safe from the inside. The child doesn't need you to become a different person. It needs you to stop abandoning yourself. It needs your honesty more than your success, your gentleness more than your strength. And in time, that part of you that once flinched, that once disappeared to survive, begins to stand. Not in rebellion, not in anger, but in presence. You reclaim your voice, not to shout, but to speak clearly. You reclaim your body, not to control, but to inhabit fully. You reclaim your boundaries, not as punishment, but as care. This is the quiet revolution of reparenting. It doesn't come with dramatic shifts. It comes with a steady warmth that says, I'm not leaving. Buddha nature is not something to earn. It's something to remember. Every act of care, every return to presence, every moment of stillness, it all clears the dust from what was always there. You are not broken. You are covered. Covered by pain, yes. By conditioning, by shame, by confusion. But none of that changes what's underneath. And when the child inside sees that you remember who they are, not what happened to them, but who they are beneath it, all they begin to return. With eyes that trust, with hands that reach, with a quiet glow that doesn't need permission anymore. This is not the end of the story, but it's the beginning of one told from love, not survival. And that makes all the difference. When care becomes consistent, when the inner child is no longer left waiting, something in your nervous system begins to shift. You stop bracing for abandonment. You stop apologizing for your own needs. You begin to rest not just in the body, but in the unfolding of your life. There's less urgency to fix, to know, to arrive. And yet, beneath this new calm, a deeper question begins to surface. If healing is not about force and identity is not fixed, then how do things really change? If you're not in control of everything, are you simply at the mercy of chaos? This is where a wiser rhythm is revealed. Not chaos, not control, but interdependence, the middle way. This is the doorway to understanding dependent origination, pratitya samutpada, the law that explains why things happen and why you don't have to control everything to be free. Dependent origination is not abstract philosophy. It's the living pattern beneath your everyday experience. It explains why you feel what you feel, why you react the way you do, why you suffer, and, more importantly, how that suffering is not permanent or personal. At its core, this teaching shows that nothing arises on its own. Everything you think of as you is built on causes and conditions. Your habits, your emotions, your beliefs, they're all shaped by something that came before. This isn't meant to dismiss responsibility. It's a way of dissolving shame. When you see clearly that your reactions are not flaws but effects of earlier events, your lens softens. You're not defective. You're conditioned, and conditioning can change. The mind often wants to make everything personal. Why am I like this? Becomes a kind of self-attack. But through the lens of dependent origination, that question becomes deeper. What causes are at play here? It's a move from blame to understanding, from resistance to compassion, from trying to control to learning how to observe. This shift opens space. You no longer react as quickly. You pause, you inquire, you see the pattern, and slowly you stop feeding the pattern. This is where freedom begins, not by overpowering your habits, but by understanding their roots and no longer giving them fuel. In daily life, this looks like noticing that anger isn't just an emotion that appears. It has conditions. Maybe it starts with a feeling of being dismissed, which arises because of an old wound, which exists because someone in your past didn't listen. When you trace it back like this, you stop seeing anger as your identity and start seeing it as a process. And when it's a process, you can meet it with wisdom instead of shame. Trusting the process doesn't mean you surrender to every impulse. It means you see that everything has a story, and you give yourself time to read it. This removes urgency. It allows you to respond with care. It's not passivity, it's deep engagement without force. You begin to see how your environment, your routines, and your relationships all influence your thoughts and feelings. This empowers you to make wise changes without needing to control outcomes. You adjust the causes rather than fight the effects. That's real agency. The most important shift here is from control to trust. Control believes that if you grip tightly enough, nothing will fall apart. But trust knows that even if things fall, you are capable of meeting what comes. Control tries to force certainty. Trust allows space for wisdom to emerge. This perspective also changes how you see other people. When someone behaves in a way that hurts you, you don't rush to condemn. You begin to see their action as the result of their own conditioning. This doesn't excuse harm, but it offers clarity. It helps you hold boundaries without hatred. It helps you speak truth without needing to punish. In relationships, this is vital. Often, conflict arises not from what's happening in the moment, but from the chain of reactions beneath it. One word triggers a fear. That fear sparks a defense. That defense provokes more fear, and so it spirals. But if even one person sees the chain and steps out of it, the cycle starts to dissolve. This is how systems shift. one insight at a time, one pause at a time, one small decision to respond differently. And the beauty of dependent origination is that it works both ways. Just as pain can grow from small causes, so can freedom. A kind word can interrupt a cycle of silence. A single breath can reset a flood of anxiety. These are not cliches. They are real shifts in the web of conditions that shape your life. Understanding this law also brings peace to the unknown. You stop expecting life to unfold in straight lines. You know that everything is moving, changing, interwoven. So when things don't go as planned, you don't panic. You adjust. You listen. You trust that something else might unfold, something unseen but not random. This kind of trust is not passive, it is steady. It keeps you grounded when things fall apart. It gives you courage when clarity hasn't yet arrived. It teaches you to sit with the tension of not knowing and still act with care. In spiritual practice, this changes everything. You stop measuring progress by how often you feel calm. You start noticing the subtle ways your reactivity lessens, your compassion deepens, your need to prove yourself fades. You're not trying to force awakening. You're aligning your life with the conditions that support it. Practice becomes less about effort and more about cultivation. You focus on the soil, not just the fruit. You ask, what am I feeding with my attention? What am I reinforcing with my choices? This is how you shift your inner environment, not through harsh discipline, but through wise care. Even suffering becomes a teacher. You no longer ask, why is this happening to me? But, what is this showing me? You learn to sit with discomfort, not as punishment, but as information. You begin to see where you're clinging, where you're resisting, where you're caught. And with that seeing, the knot begins to loosen. This isn't about analyzing everything. It's about gently tracing the shape of your experience so you can meet it with clarity. When you do this, you discover something liberating. There's always a choice. Not between good and bad, but between awareness and unconscious repetition. The more you trust this unfolding, the less you need things to look a certain way. You stop chasing peak experiences. You start appreciating ordinary moments. You begin to find meaning in the process itself. Not in getting somewhere, but in how you relate to what is here. This kind of trust is revolutionary in a world that demands constant proof, results, and perfection. It allows you to rest while still being fully engaged, to grow without self-rejection, to live from presence instead of performance. It also transforms how you respond to setbacks. Instead of collapsing into despair or blaming yourself, you pause, you reflect. You ask what conditions led to this moment and what small shift might change the next one. This makes every moment a doorway, not to escape, but to return. In this framework, even small gestures carry weight. A moment of listening, a breath before reacting, a compassionate thought. Each one shifts the pattern, not dramatically, but deeply. Because the process isn't linear, it's layered. And every layer you touch with awareness changes the whole. You begin to notice how your intentions shape your experience. When your actions come from fear, they leave residue. When they come from clarity, they bring ease. This doesn't mean you never make mistakes. It means you see mistakes as part of the path, not as detours, but as teachings. Dependent origination also reveals the illusion of isolation. You see how every choice, every word, every silence echoes. Your healing affects others. Your presence stabilizes more than just your own life. This doesn't make you responsible for everything. It makes you connected. That connection brings dignity, humility, grace. And grace is what allows you to keep going, even when results aren't immediate. You begin to see the long arc, the quiet changes, the unseen ripples. You stop needing to measure everything. You learn to trust the invisible shifts. You become patient, not out of resignation, but out of faith in the pattern. This trust lets you hold uncertainty without hardening. It lets you face difficulty without losing heart. It lets you offer care without needing recognition. It lets you live with purpose that isn't driven by ego. And when life surprises you, when it collapses, opens, rearranges you, no longer panic. You meet it with a steady gaze. You ask what wants to emerge now, what's ready to be let go, what's asking to be nurtured, because you know you're not alone in any of it. Everything is part of something larger. Everything is part of something arising together. That is the essence of dependent origination. Not control, not fate, but unfolding, guided not by certainty, but by awareness, held not by rules, but by relationship, made sacred not by destination, but by the willingness to walk, to listen, and to trust that the path reveals itself one step at a time. This is not just spiritual wisdom, it's a new way of living, a way that no longer needs to hold everything tightly, a way that allows you to breathe, to move, to become, fully, gently, without forcing, and always with trust. As the habit of grasping loosens and the body begins to trust that it can rest in life's unfolding, something deeper surfaces, not louder but heavier. It has been sitting quietly beneath the movement and reflection, carried for years without full awareness. Shame, not the loud shame of public error or sharp embarrassment, but the silent kind. The kind that creeps into the way you see yourself, that shapes your voice when you speak, that makes you shrink in subtle moments without knowing why. It lives in the pauses between your thoughts. It colors how you treat yourself. This is the moment to face it, not with more judgment, but with the wisdom that has been growing in you since the beginning of this path. Shame doesn't need more analysis. It needs understanding. It needs light. It needs to be met with the same gentleness you've been learning to apply in silence, in breath, in compassion. The Buddhist teachings offer a clear framework for this, methods that were never about perfection, but about freeing the heart from the misunderstandings that keep it small. Shame thrives in isolation. It convinces you that you're alone in your failures, different in your flaws, unworthy of belonging. But Buddhism begins from the truth of shared suffering. The first noble truth says that pain is part of life, not because you did something wrong, but because you are alive. This reframes shame entirely. It takes it out of the realm of identity and places it within the human condition. You're not broken, you're human. And that's the doorway to healing. Inner criticism is often mistaken for motivation. Many people have been taught that being hard on themselves is how growth happens. But this belief causes harm. It splits the mind, creating an inner attacker and an inner victim. The Buddha called this kind of division one of the causes of suffering, not because anger is wrong, but because it misunderstands the way the mind works. You don't need to fight yourself to improve. You need to understand yourself to become free. The 5 hindrances give us a direct way to see the patterns that block this freedom. These are not sins or flaws. They are mental states that cloud awareness. Each one, when understood, points to a need underneath. They are not enemies, they are signals. The first hindrance is sensual desire. It shows up when the mind reaches outward to soothe something unprocessed. It might look like chasing pleasure or numbing pain. But underneath it is a desire to feel whole. Shame often feeds this pattern by telling you that stillness is unsafe, that you must escape yourself to survive. The practice here is not to suppress the desire, but to meet the need behind it. What part of you is longing to be comforted? When you bring presence to the ache itself, you begin to untangle it from craving. The second hindrance is ill will. This includes anger, resentment, irritation, and often self-directed hostility. When shame takes root, It can grow into a quiet rage at yourself for being the way you are. You might hear it in your thoughts. Why am I still like this? Why can't I get it right? The method here is softening, not giving in, but turning toward the harshness with curiosity. When you name it gently, this is ill, will you create space? And in that space, kindness becomes possible. You begin to see that the anger you carry was often learned from others. It's not your voice, it's an echo. The third hindrance is sloth and torpor. It's the fog that settles over the mind when shame feels too heavy to face. You may feel numb, unmotivated, or distant. This isn't laziness. It's a natural freeze response. The nervous system slows down when it feels unsafe. The practice here is gentle arousing of energy, not by force, but through small, loving action. A walk, a breath, a question asked with care. What's possible right now? Just one step. The fourth hindrance is restlessness and worry. The mind spins in endless loops, trying to escape the weight it carries. Thoughts jump from one fear to another. Shame can drive this pattern by telling you that you have to fix everything before you're allowed to feel peace. But the practice is stillness, not by shutting down the mind, but by returning to the breath again and again with compassion. You don't need all the answers to be okay. You just need to come back now. The fifth hindrance is doubt. This is perhaps the most corrosive in the context of shame. It whispers, this path won't work. You're too far gone. You'll never really change. But this isn't wisdom. It's fear. The practice is not to argue with doubt, but to keep practicing. To build confidence not through belief, but through experience. You remember your intention. You return to your breath. You do the next kind thing. And slowly, trust grows. These hindrances are not barriers to shame healing, they are maps. Each one reveals the conditions that shame thrives in. And when met with understanding, each one loses its grip. Right effort is the next step. It's the guiding light in working with the hindrances. Not the kind of effort that strains, but the kind that knows when to lean in and when to rest. It's about applying just enough energy, not too much to cause tension, not too little to drift into inertia. Right effort has 4 parts: preventing unwholesome states from arising, abandoning unwholesome states that have arisen, cultivating wholesome states not yet present, and maintaining wholesome states already present. In working with shame, the first step is to prevent the mind from falling into known traps. This means learning your patterns. If you know certain habits, conversations, or media leave you in self-judgment, you begin to limit your exposure not from fear, but from wisdom. The second step is abandoning unwholesome states. When inner criticism arises, you meet it with clarity. You don't believe it automatically. You question it. You ask, is this true? Is this helpful? What would love say instead? This weakens the pattern over time. The third step is cultivating wholesome states. This includes compassion, patience, and self-forgiveness. These are not moods, they're muscles. You strengthen them through daily choices. You speak to yourself gently. You create rituals of care. You choose presence when avoidance would be easier. The fourth step is sustaining those states. This is where trust deepens. You begin to see that kindness is not a temporary feeling, it's a path. You walk it even when it's hard. Even when shame whispers that you don't deserve it. You stay with your intention. You stay with your breath. Buddhist practice does not promise that shame will disappear overnight. It promises that with awareness, you can stop being ruled by it. Shame loses power when it's seen without fear. When it's met with wisdom, it becomes part of your story, not the whole story. And when shame is no longer running the show, something deeper starts to emerge. Not confidence as performance, but dignity. You begin to feel worthy, not because you're perfect, but because you're present. You make peace with your imperfection. You stop proving. You start being. This transformation changes how you walk in the world. You set boundaries without guilt. You express needs without apology. You rest without justification. You no longer need to earn belonging. You embody it. The mind quiets, not because it has no thoughts, but because it no longer attacks. The body relaxes, not because there's no pain, but because it's no longer bracing against self-hate. Your choices become more aligned, not to impress others, but to honor your own wholeness. This is not a final state, it's a practice, a way of moving through each day with integrity and softness. Shame may still visit, but it no longer defines the room. It becomes a signal, not a sentence. And over time, as you keep meeting it with wisdom, the space inside you grows. You begin to trust that you are more than your worst moments, that your worth is not fragile, that your essence is not up for debate. This is what it means to move from shame to wholeness, not by erasing the past, but by bringing it into the light, not by silencing the inner critic, but by giving the inner truth a stronger voice, not by pretending you're flawless, but by knowing you are still and always worthy of love. When shame no longer dictates your steps, and the voice within begins to sound more like a friend than an enemy, a kind of spaciousness opens up. You are no longer busy defending yourself or proving your worth. There is room to ask, not from fear, but from sincerity. What is my life really for? What am I here to live, offer, create? Not as a performance, not for validation, but from a quiet place inside that longs to serve something deeper than ego. This is the turning point where attention shifts from self-repair to alignment, a movement away from survival and toward meaning. Not the kind of meaning that inflates identity, but the kind that comes gently, like a whisper. This is the Dharma. Dharma is not a job description. It's not the title on a business card or a set of goals on a vision board. Dharma is the expression of truth through your life. It's the way your unique presence meets the world when you are fully aligned with what is real. It's not one path for everyone. It's not about achieving something. It's about becoming clear enough to hear what life is asking from you, not what the ego wants to take. The ego seeks status. Dharma seeks sincerity. The ego grasps at significance. Dharma listens for truth. The ego builds identity. Dharma dissolves it. This is not a rejection of identity altogether, but a softening of its grip. When identity is held lightly, it becomes a vehicle, not a prison. You begin to recognize that your purpose is not a product of pressure. It's not revealed through striving. It unfolds as striving dissolves. In this way, Dharma doesn't shout, it whispers. And to hear the whisper, the noise has to quiet, not by force, but by attention. Stillness becomes essential not as a dramatic silence, but as the background that makes subtle signals clear. This clarity is not sudden. It arrives slowly, through presence. Often, you only notice it in hindsight. The things that light you up, the moments that feel whole, even when unnoticed by others. The tasks that pull you into a flow where time loses its grip. These are signs, not of talent alone, but of alignment, where life and awareness meet with ease. Listening to Dharma means releasing comparison. No one else can walk your path. No one else can tell you what is yours to carry. Advice may help you orient, but your deepest direction comes from stillness. And that direction rarely arrives as a full map. It comes in steps. One choice, one conversation, one brave decision to say yes when fear says no. Ego wants certainty. Dharma invites trust. And trust is what grows when you commit to acting from what feels real, even if you don't know where it will lead. You begin to value inner congruence more than external approval. You choose authenticity over applause. And strangely, in doing so, you begin to connect more deeply with others, not through roles, but through presence. Spiritual materialism, a term used by teachers like Chogyam Trungpa, refers to the way ego uses even spiritual growth to reinforce itself. You meditate to be seen as enlightened. You serve others to feel superior. You collect teachings like badges instead of applying them as medicine. When this happens, the Dharma is lost, even if the language remains. Real Dharma work involves stripping away performance. It's about coming back to what is true before it becomes impressive. It's about humility, not ambition. You don't need to be known. You need to be sincere. Dharma doesn't need spotlight. It thrives in honest action, however small. This work requires deep listening, not just in formal practice, but in life. The way your body feels after a conversation, the energy behind your decisions, the texture of your attention when you work. These are all places where alignment reveals itself. When you are on the path of your Dharma, even difficulty feels meaningful. When you're off, even success feels hollow. But the path is not fixed. Dharma evolves as your insight deepens. What was once aligned may no longer fit. That's not failure, it's refinement. You learn to let go when it's time, not because you've given up, but because life is pointing elsewhere. Attachment to form, even spiritual form, can block deeper unfolding. Right livelihood, as part of the Eightfold Path, points to this. It means choosing work that doesn't harm others, yes, but more deeply, it means choosing a way of living that expresses your values. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but with integrity. When your daily actions reflect your inner truth, suffering lessens even if circumstances are hard. This alignment also shifts your sense of success. It becomes less about how much you produce and more about the quality of presence behind what you do. You might speak fewer words, but they carry weight. You might serve in quiet ways, but the impact runs deep. You stop needing proof. You start trusting your own experience. This does not mean you'll never doubt your path. Doubt is part of growth. It sharpens discernment. But you no longer use doubt as a weapon against yourself. You see it as a signal to pause, to listen more closely. You trust that direction will return, not through striving, but through stillness. Purpose is not found, it is revealed, and often what reveals it is your willingness to stay close to discomfort, to remain awake in the in-between spaces where clarity hasn't yet arrived. The Dharma unfolds not only in clarity, but in confusion, in waiting, in surrender. You also begin to realize that Dharma is not always grand. It might not lead to recognition or legacy. Sometimes, your path is to offer presence in quiet places, to tend to what others ignore, to do small things with immense care. This is not lesser work, it is the essence of service. Even failure becomes part of the path. When you act from alignment and things fall apart, it's not a sign you were wrong. It's a refinement. Life removes what no longer fits. You lose jobs, relationships, roles, but what remains is more honest, more real. You begin to see how much energy you once spent holding up what wasn't truly yours. This shedding brings grief, yes, but also freedom. You're no longer carrying what drains you. You're no longer pretending. What arises in its place is quieter, but steadier. A life that may not look impressive from the outside, but feels rooted from within. When you meet others from this place, your presence becomes healing. Not because you have answers, but because you're living from alignment. You don't offer advice, you offer being. You're not trying to fix, you're bearing witness. This kind of presence cannot be faked. It's felt. As you live from Dharma, even your spiritual practice changes. It becomes less about achieving states and more about deepening into truth. You practice not to become something else, but to become more fully yourself, the self that is not ego but expression, not a thing but a movement, alive and evolving. And with that comes a new kind of peace, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of clarity. You still feel pain, you still face hardship, but you're no longer lost. You are connected to something greater than your self-concept, something deeper than your plans, something sacred. This is not something you chase, it's something you listen for. And when you hear it, you respond. That response is the path. That response is your offering. That response is your dharma. And in time, you stop asking what your purpose is and start living it not as an answer, but as a practice. You begin each day not with a plan to prove, but with a question to serve. How can truth move through me today? This is the whisper. This is the way. And this is the peace that comes not from control, but from surrendering to what is already waiting in you, quietly, patiently, completely. When purpose no longer depends on applause and meaning arises from simple, truthful acts, something in the heart begins to soften. The striving that once filled your days loses its pull. You no longer chase importance. You no longer need to be seen to feel real. But even in this quiet strength, there can still be a subtle ache, a longing to be recognized, a silent wish to be celebrated for the goodness you offer without being asked. When that recognition doesn't come, something inside may begin to dim, not out of resentment, but out of fatigue. This is where another form of joy waits to be uncovered, a joy not tied to personal achievement, a joy that lives in the success of others, a joy that heals the wounds of invisibility. This is the power of mudita. Mudita, or sympathetic joy, is one of the 4 immeasurables in Buddhist teachings. It is the ability to take delight in the happiness of others, not because it benefits you, but because it reflects the natural goodness that life can hold. It is the antidote to envy, comparison, and scarcity. It is also the medicine for the hidden grief of being overlooked. In a world where value is often measured by visibility, practicing joy for others without needing it for yourself is radical. It's not about pretending you're happy when you're hurting. It's about shifting the source of joy from the self-image to the shared field of goodness. When someone else receives what you've longed for, the reflex may be to shrink, to measure your worth against theirs. But mudita invites you to expand instead. This expansion is not automatic. It requires training, it requires presence, and it requires honesty about the subtle pain that sometimes shows up when others succeed. That pain is not wrong, it's human. It's the residue of a culture that taught you to compete, to compare, to constantly ask, "What about me?" Mudita doesn't ask you to deny that pain. It asks you to hold it with care, while also making space for a joy that is not about possession, but about possibility. You begin by noticing small moments where joy is available without effort. A child laughing, a friend finding peace, a stranger being helped. These are not your victories, but they belong to no one. They are part of a shared field. When you let yourself feel moved by them, without turning them into stories about your lack, something quiet begins to shift inside. The heart, once clenched by scarcity, begins to loosen. The need to compare softens. You begin to see that joy is not a limited resource. It does not decrease by being shared. In fact, the more you celebrate joy in others, the more attuned you become to joy in general, not surface pleasure, but the deeper pulse of aliveness that runs through all beings. This practice becomes even more powerful when applied during moments of invisibility. When your efforts go unnoticed, when others receive what you've quietly worked for, when recognition is withheld. Instead of feeding resentment, you pause, you breathe, you remember, their joy does not take yours away. Their light does not cast you into darkness. Your worth is not diminished by their visibility. You may even say silently, "May their happiness continue. May their success bring more goodness into the world." Not to bypass your feelings, but to expand your field of awareness. You are reminding your heart that it is big enough to hold both longing and celebration, that your dignity is not determined by external acknowledgement. This kind of joy becomes a mirror. You begin to see that what you appreciate in others often reflects your own values. When you feel touched by someone's kindness, it is because you recognize the same seed in yourself. When someone shines and your heart lights up, it is a quiet remembering that light lives in you, too, even if it hasn't been seen yet. Mudita also helps dissolve the illusion of separateness. In a culture driven by individualism, joy is often privatized. We are taught to claim it, defend it, and measure it. But sympathetic joy sees through that illusion. It recognizes that joy is relational, that it is less about having and more about sensing, less about ownership and more about openness. When someone you love succeeds, your happiness doesn't come from the fact that they won. It comes from their smile, their peace, their lightness. It's a resonance. That resonance is available beyond relationships. You can feel it with people you barely know, with people who may never know you. The joy still moves you. It still belongs to the heart. This practice becomes even more refined when extended toward those you envy, not in a forced or performative way, but in a gentle, honest unfolding. You start by acknowledging the pain of comparison. You let yourself feel it without judgment. Then, when ready, you offer a simple wish. May they be truly happy. May that happiness be deep and lasting. These wishes may feel distant at first, but over time they begin to soften the inner edges. The heart becomes less protective, less armored, more open to the beauty that exists beyond personal gain. You also begin to see that mudita protects against burnout. When your joy depends only on your own outcomes, life can feel narrow. But when you are nourished by the joy around you, your well is always being filled. You are no longer waiting for your turn. You are participating in the turning of joy itself. This orientation changes how you move through the world. You celebrate more easily. You give praise more freely. You uplift without needing credit. Not because you're trying to be good, but because it feels natural. The heart finds pleasure in connection, not control. And yet, mudita is not passivity. It is not complacency. It doesn't mean you stop longing, or striving, or dreaming. It means you stop resenting others for having what you don't. You continue to walk your path, but with a lighter heart. A heart that is not closed by comparison. This also makes room for mutual joy. You become someone others feel safe celebrating with. You are not the friend who disappears when things go well for others. You become a steady witness to their rising. Your presence becomes a blessing, not a competition. And in turn, you attract relationships where your own joy can be shared without fear of envy. The deeper your practice of mudita, the less attached you become to specific forms of success. Because you see that what you were really seeking was the feeling, the warmth, the openness, the expansion, and now that feeling is available through connection, not just achievement. You learn to locate joy in moments of resonance, not reward. In watching someone heal, in hearing someone laugh after a long silence, in seeing beauty, not because it's yours, but because it exists. That is enough. You may still feel moments of inadequacy. That's natural, but those moments no longer define you. You let them pass like weather. You remember that wholeness is not a competition, it is your birthright. This kind of joy becomes your resting place, a place you can return to again and again, especially when the ego feels bruised or unseen. It reminds you that you are part of something larger, that your light does not depend on stage lights, that your life, in its quiet sincerity, is enough. And from this ground, you give more freely, not from emptiness, but from fullness. You give without needing thanks. You give without expecting return. Your joy becomes your offering. And what a rare offering that is, a joy that doesn't take, doesn't perform, doesn't prove, a joy that heals simply by existing, a joy that whispers, "We're in this together," and means it. This is the path of mudita, not easy, but real, not loud, but powerful. A joy that doesn't ask to be seen, but changes everything it touches, quietly, steadily, completely. The heart that learns to rejoice in the happiness of others begins to unbind itself from the endless hunger for validation. It rests more easily in presence. It softens toward others without losing its own center. But even with this opening, even with these new ways of relating, some patterns still return. They resurface in the quiet hours, in the tension of old reactions, in the repetition of pain that seems to have no source. These are not failures. These are echoes. Signs that deeper layers are ready to be seen. Patterns that do not respond to logic or effort or positivity. These are the inner cycles of samsara, unconscious loops that have been spinning inside for years. And the next step on the path is not escape, but recognition. Samsara, in Buddhist teaching, is not only a cosmic cycle of death and rebirth, it is also psychological. It is personal. It plays out in the mind each day through habits of fear, craving, aversion, clinging, and delusion. Samsara is the looping of thoughts that lead you back to suffering, even when you know better. It's not your fault, it's conditioning. But conditioning can be seen, and what is seen clearly can begin to loosen. These inner loops are not always obvious. They may disguise themselves as personality traits, like "I'm just anxious" or "I'm always the one who gives more." But beneath these identities are systems of belief formed long ago, often in response to pain. The mind forms strategies to stay safe, to stay loved, to stay in control. And even when those strategies stop working, they continue to repeat because they are familiar. One way to begin identifying these loops is through reflection, not analysis, but presence. You observe where the mind goes when it feels threatened. Do you disappear? Do you lash out? Do you try to fix everyone around you? These responses are not weaknesses. They are old maps. They made sense once. They don't need shame. They need compassion. You also look at the emotional residue they leave behind. Does a situation leave you drained beyond reason? Is the reaction larger than the moment? That's a sign of samsara at work, past pain, reenacted in the present. Recognizing this brings agency. It interrupts the trance of reactivity. Another entry point is watching your relationship to desire. Craving in Buddhism is not just for food or pleasure, it's for certainty, for control, for identity. When the mind grasps at something and believes it must have it to be okay, the wheel begins to turn. You get the thing, and the relief is short. Then the cycle starts again. Not because you're doing life wrong, but because you're caught in a pattern that can't bring lasting peace. To begin stepping out, you do not attack the craving. You meet it with awareness. You ask gently, "What am I really seeking right now?" Often, the answer is not the thing itself, but a feeling of being whole, being seen, being safe. When you recognize the deeper longing, you can bring care to that place directly, instead of chasing satisfaction through external conditions. Aversion is another wheel that keeps spinning. It appears as resistance, as judgment, as defensiveness. It says, "This shouldn't be happening," and then builds a case. But under aversion is often fear or grief. The reaction is there to protect something tender. Again, the practice is not to suppress, but to meet, to recognize the feeling and name it. Aversion is here. Then breathe, then stay. The staying softens the spin. It tells the nervous system that pain does not have to mean danger. Clinging to identity is perhaps the most subtle form of inner samsara. The idea that you are this kind of person or that you must always act this way to be loved. These fixed self-views may have been useful once, but now they narrow your experience. You may find yourself repeating roles: caretaker, hero, outsider, perfectionist, not because they reflect truth, but because they have become habits. The practice is to loosen identification, not with rejection, but with curiosity. What would it be like to let this role rest? Who am I when I'm not trying to be someone? Delusion, the final component, is not ignorance in the harsh sense. It's more like forgetfulness, forgetting the impermanence of all things, forgetting that pain will pass, forgetting that thoughts are not facts. Delusion fuels the cycle by hiding the way out. The way out is seeing clearly, again and again. You build this clarity through daily presence. You notice the body's signals. You slow down the moment between stimulus and response. You bring kindness to your inner world instead of trying to fix it. This makes space. And in that space, the loop begins to dissolve, not through force, but through understanding. Compassion is essential here. Without it, awareness can become another weapon, another way to judge yourself for repeating old pain. But compassion reframes the loop as a call for care. Each repetition is a doorway back to something that was never fully seen. When you enter with gentleness, the part that's been looping begins to trust. It begins to release. Sometimes insight comes through pain. A relationship ends, and the pattern becomes visible. A setback brings old narratives back to the surface. These moments are hard, but they are also invitations to see the samsara within, to respond differently this time. Not perfectly, just with more awareness. Ritual can help anchor this work. You might light a candle before reflection, or write letters to parts of yourself that feel trapped, or place a hand over your heart when old fear arises. These are not solutions. They are signals to the nervous system, to the heart, that it is safe to see, safe to soften. Community also matters. Samsara thrives in isolation. When you speak your patterns aloud in trusted spaces, their power begins to fade. You see that others have their own loops, that none of us are separate in this struggle. Shared reflection brings shared liberation. The path out of inner samsara is not about reaching a destination. It's about changing your relationship to the cycle. You no longer believe it blindly. You learn its rhythm. You recognize the early signs. And sometimes that recognition alone is enough to stop the wheel. When the mind is free, it doesn't stop thinking. It stops clinging. When the heart is free, it doesn't stop feeling. It stops fearing its own tenderness. This is the liberation that unfolds, not in one great moment, but in small, steady openings. A breath, a pause, a choice to listen instead of react. You begin to find yourself less controlled by past narratives, less pulled by old habits, more able to meet the moment as it is. You still feel, but you don't get lost. You still stumble, but you recover faster. This is not perfection. This is maturity. You stop waiting to be fully healed before you live. You live as you heal. You walk through the cycles with open eyes. And each time you remember more quickly, I don't have to follow this. I can turn inward and meet what's real. I can choose presence over pattern. And slowly the loops lose momentum. They quiet, they dissolve. And what's left is not emptiness but presence, not a void, but a clear space from which you can meet your life freshly, gently. wisely, without needing to repeat what no longer serves. This is the liberation from samsara, not by escape, but by seeing, not by fixing, but by freeing, not all at once, but breath by breath, layer by layer, until what once felt like fate becomes choice, until what once controlled you becomes your teacher, until you return not to who you were, but to the truth that was always waiting beneath the spin. When you begin to recognize the loops within you and meet them without judgment, a subtle clarity grows. You realize that not every feeling needs to be traced to its root, not every reaction needs to be solved. The grip of old narrative starts to loosen, but in its place may come something unfamiliar, quiet confusion, a spaciousness that is not yet filled, a strange stillness where answers used to be. This is not regression, this is not avoidance. This is the beginning of something softer and more profound. It is the entry into not knowing. There is a type of peace that does not come from certainty, a clarity that does not arise from explanation. Zen teachings have long pointed to this path, not through theory or mental frameworks, but through the radical act of resting directly in experience without needing to name it, to sit with what is without dividing it, to welcome emotion not with analysis, but with presence. This is the heart of beginner's mind. Beginner's mind is not naive. It is not pretending you know nothing. It is letting go of the need to know in order to feel safe. It's allowing the mystery of the moment to be as it is, without rushing to interpret, judge, or resolve it. This approach invites a kind of emotional honesty that bypasses performance. You are not managing your feelings, you are meeting them. In daily life, the habit is to label emotions quickly. Sadness, anger, shame. Once labeled, the mind builds a story, and that story can become heavier than the emotion itself. Not knowing interrupts that momentum. It allows space between sensation and story. That space is where integration happens. Not because the emotion is resolved, but because it is allowed to exist without being made into an identity. This is particularly important in moments of overwhelm. When emotion rises like a wave, and the mind tries to define it, fix it, or justify it, something tightens. The more you try to understand in that moment, the more tangled things become. Zen invites a different move, a non-move. Just stay. Feel the sensation in the body. Notice the breath. Let thought pass through without grasping. The feeling may stay or shift, but your relationship to it changes. You're not swimming against it. You're floating within it. This form of presence does not mean suppressing thought or emotion. It means relating to them from awareness rather than attachment. You notice the emotion. You feel its weight, its temperature, its rhythm. But you don't demand an explanation. You don't turn it into a problem to solve. This can feel unsettling at first, especially if your safety has always come from control. But with time, you realize the deep relief of not having to define everything. There is wisdom in this surrender. When you stop naming your experience as good or bad, progress or failure, something deeper reveals itself. You begin to feel the emotion in its raw form, not as a threat, but as energy, as movement, as something that doesn't need to be defended against. Zen calls this direct seeing. It is not about bypassing thought. It is about seeing before thought, feeling before concept, being before self-description. In this space, emotions begin to integrate naturally, not through logic, but through attention. The body processes what the mind cannot. The breath becomes the bridge. This approach also shifts how you relate to others. When someone expresses pain or confusion, the reflex may be to offer solutions or insight. But Zen teaches that presence is more powerful than explanation. You don't have to know what to say. You don't have to fix. Just be there. Trust that your willingness to be with them in the unknown is enough. Practicing not knowing in relationships creates room for genuine connection. You stop projecting your assumptions. You listen more. You speak with less urgency. You ask without demanding answers. This invites others to be more authentic, too. They sense they don't have to perform understanding to be accepted. They can be unsure and still belong. This approach also brings kindness to yourself. When emotions arise without clear cause, the mind often demands answers. What's wrong with me? Why am I like this again? But beginner's mind says, it's okay not to know. The feeling is here. That is enough. Stay with it. Trust that it belongs, even if it doesn't explain itself. Over time, this trust becomes embodied. The nervous system begins to recognize that safety does not require clarity. It begins to soften in the presence of uncertainty. The mind stops interrupting the heart's process. The result is a quiet integration that happens in the background, like healing while you sleep. One of the most practical aspects of this practice is its simplicity. You don't need a special space or time. You just pause. You feel. You let go of the need to finish the thought. You breathe into the space that follows. Even 5 seconds of resting in not knowing can begin to change your internal landscape. This also brings a shift in how you view growth. You stop measuring it by how many problems you've solved or how often you feel peaceful. You start seeing growth as your capacity to remain with what is, to not panic in the face of complexity, to not harden in the presence of confusion. This is emotional maturity, not clarity, but openness. The path of not knowing also brings humility. You no longer need to be right to feel secure. You can admit you don't have all the answers, even to yourself. And in doing so, you stop resisting life's inherent mystery. You begin to live with it, to dance with it, to bow to it. This doesn't mean you abandon discernment. Beginner's mind is not blindness. It is clarity without clinging. You still make choices. You still name things when helpful. But you know the difference between a helpful label and a limiting one. You use words as tools, not cages. This freedom extends to your past as well. The need to fully understand your story can soften. You stop trying to pin down exactly why things happened. You stop searching for a perfect narrative. Instead, you allow the story to remain fluid, alive. You carry it lightly, rather than letting it define you. And in doing so, the self becomes more spacious. Not because it has been perfected, but because it is no longer held so tightly. You become less reactive, more responsive, less defined by emotion, more able to meet it without collapse. Beginner's mind is not passive. It is deeply engaged. But its engagement is relaxed, not tense, curious, not grasping. It meets the moment with a kind of reverence. Not because the moment is special, but because it is fully here. This way of being allows joy to return in subtle forms. A simple breath, a silent evening, the taste of tea without commentary. These moments, once overlooked, begin to feel complete. Not because they are dramatic, but because they are undivided. You stop needing to explain why you feel okay. You just feel okay. And when you don't, you rest there too, without making it a problem, without demanding resolution. And so, not knowing becomes your teacher, a teacher that does not lecture, but reveals, that invites rather than instructs, that leads not with answers, but with depth. You learn to let life speak for itself, to trust that every emotion, every silence, every unknown moment is part of a larger unfolding. You don't have to see the whole picture to belong to it. You just stay present, with less certainty, but more truth, with fewer conclusions, but more peace. And as you rest in that space undefended, unclenched, Awake, you find that what once felt incomplete is no longer in need of fixing. It is simply part of the mystery you are learning to love. When you stop needing to explain everything, when the mind no longer rushes to define what it feels, a new kind of inner space opens. In that space, emotion can rise and fall without resistance. Thoughts can pass without argument. And in the silence that remains, something softer begins to speak, not in ideas, but in glimpses. You start to sense that your story, the one you've carried for years, may not be as fixed as you once believed. Not because it was false, but because it was incomplete. It was written through a narrow lens. And now, with presence, you're ready to see more clearly. To look at your life not through judgment, but through understanding. This is the essence of right view. Right view is the first step on the Noble Eightfold Path, and also the one that informs every other step. It is not a belief system. It is a way of seeing that brings clarity, compassion, and balance. It is the choice to view your experience through wisdom rather than fear, through awareness rather than habit. And in this context, it becomes a doorway to rewriting the internal story that has shaped your identity. Most people inherit their view of self early in life. Through repetition, feedback, unspoken rules, and painful experiences, you start to construct a narrative. This is who I am. This is what I'm worth. This is what I must hide. And often, this story goes unquestioned for decades. It becomes a lens so familiar that it feels like truth. But right view asks a different question. Is this story skillful? Is it based in clarity or confusion? Does it lead to more suffering or less? To begin healing through right view, you start by observing the inner narratives that shape your thoughts and choices, the ones that say you're too much or not enough, the ones that call you broken, difficult, unworthy. Not to fight them, but to see them. Where did they come from? Who told you this? What conditions planted those ideas? Right view does not try to erase your past. It gives you the freedom to see your past without becoming stuck in it. As you apply this lens, you begin to see the difference between pain and identity. Pain is real, but identity built around pain becomes heavy. It locks you in place. With right view, you begin to understand that you are not your story. You are the awareness holding the story. You are not the wound. You are the capacity to heal. This shift is not conceptual. It happens slowly, through gentle repetition. When the inner critic arises, you notice it. You ask, does this thought reflect clarity or old conditioning? You begin to pause before accepting your mind's assumptions. You remember that the mind is shaped by habit, and habits can change. Right view also includes the understanding of impermanence, that everything, feelings, thoughts, identities is changing. Even your core beliefs about yourself are not permanent. They were formed through experience, and they can be softened through new experience. This brings hope, not the kind that denies difficulty, but the kind that opens possibility. This perspective also helps when you face relapse into old patterns. Instead of thinking, I'm back where I started, you begin to see, this is part of the process. Not failure, but unfolding. Not a return, but a reminder. The story doesn't end here, it deepens. Another aspect of right view is karma, not as punishment, but as momentum. Every thought, word, and action sets something in motion. The way you speak to yourself creates a ripple. The way you meet your pain shapes your future responses. When you apply this to self-concept, you realize that your identity is not static, it's continually influenced by how you relate to it. If you meet your inner world with kindness, new patterns form. If you respond to shame with presence, it loses its grip. This is how you begin to rewrite the inner story. Not through dramatic declarations, but through consistent presence. You stop repeating old lines like, "I'm a failure," or "I always mess things up," and you start introducing new language that is rooted in clarity. Not false affirmation, but truthful acknowledgement. This is difficult, and I'm learning. I made a mistake, and I'm still worthy. I don't know yet, and that's okay. These phrases become more than words. They become new grooves in the mind, new possibilities for how you experience yourself. Over time, these new pathways begin to replace the old ones, not by force, but by practice. Right view also shifts your understanding of other people. You begin to see their behavior through the lens of cause and condition. They too are shaped by fear, history, confusion, and longing. This doesn't mean you excuse harm, but it allows you to stop taking everything personally. You free yourself from resentment by recognizing shared humanity. You stop defining yourself through how others treat you. You begin to trust your own view. This clarity brings a kind of grounded confidence, not arrogance, but stability. You know who you are not because of who others say you are, but because you are no longer confused by every passing thought. You are not clinging to a fixed image. You are open to growth. As your view shifts, so does your speech. You speak more kindly to yourself and others. You become more honest, but less harsh. You stop reinforcing harmful identities through repetition. You learn to speak words that reflect healing, not harm. Your actions follow. You choose differently. Not because you've forced yourself, but because your new view makes old behaviors less compelling. You no longer act from self-punishment or emptiness. You act from alignment. Right view supports this by keeping you close to intention. Why am I doing this? What result am I reinforcing? You don't need perfection, you just need awareness. That awareness brings choice. And choice is freedom. Even when painful memories surface, right view helps you hold them differently. You don't get pulled into the full narrative. You recognize the memory as part of your past, not your prison. You see that while you cannot change what happened, you can change what you believe about it. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What does this part of me need?" You extend this clarity to your goals. Right view helps you recognize when ambition is driven by ego or fear, and when it's guided by purpose. You stop measuring your worth by achievement. You begin to define success as alignment, not approval. In meditation, right view helps you relate to your thoughts as passing phenomena. You don't fight them, but you don't follow them either. You sit, you watch. You learn to trust the stillness that holds everything. This path is not linear. The story rewrites itself slowly, sometimes painfully, but it does shift. The more often you return to the present, the more the old narrative loses its authority. You no longer need to be the person your wounds made you. You become the person your awareness reveals. This healing is not loud. It's not always visible, but it's real. You start to see it in your choices, in your relationships, in the way you pause before reacting. You hear it in your own voices ofter, clearer, more rooted in care. Eventually, you stop needing to tell yourself a better story. You just live it. You trust that your life, as it unfolds through presence and right view, becomes the truest narrative of all. Not because it's perfect, but because it's no longer driven by illusion. And so you continue not with pressure, but with patience. Not to arrive, but to return again and again to what is real. To see clearly, to choose wisely, to live gently. And in doing so, to become free. When your inner lens becomes clearer, and your story no longer weighs you down with blame or illusion, something even deeper starts to call you. It is not about achieving a perfect self or fixing what was broken. It is about finding a place to rest, a place inside that holds you when things fall apart, a place that isn't shaken by mood or outcome. even as thoughts quiet, even as identity softens, the human heart still longs for something steady, something that can be trusted, something that is not made of conditions. This is where the teachings on refuge become not just spiritual ideas, but lived medicine. This is the return to the triple gem, not as belief, but as sanctuary. Taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha is often taught as a formal commitment, a ceremonial gateway into Buddhist practice. But beyond the ritual, it points to a deep inner orientation. It is a vow to yourself. I will not look only outward for safety. I will begin to seek steadiness where it can actually be found. To take refuge in the Buddha does not mean worshipping a figure from history. It means recognizing the capacity for awakening within you. It is remembering that clarity, compassion, and deep wisdom are already possible in this life, in this mind, not as a distant goal, but as something that already flickers in your moments of presence. When you take refuge in the Buddha, you are saying, I will trust the part of me that sees clearly. I will not follow the voices of fear and confusion. I will return again and again to what is real, even if I don't yet understand it fully. Psychologically, this is a profound shift. It means that instead of seeing yourself as fundamentally flawed, you begin to honor your own potential for insight. The same mind that has wandered is the mind that can return. The same heart that has closed is the heart that can open. Refuge in the Buddha means you stop abandoning yourself when you feel lost. You remember that your true nature is not brokenness, but awareness itself. Refuge in the Dharma is a commitment to truth, not fixed doctrines, but the kind of truth that shows itself through careful observation. You take refuge in the way things actually are. You begin to watch the patterns that create suffering and the choices that lessen it. You trust cause and effect. You align your life with what brings freedom instead of what brings confusion. This is not about being right. It is about being honest. When you take refuge in the Dharma, you stop pretending that ignoring your pain will make it go away. You stop chasing happiness in ways that never last. You stop feeding cycles that only exhaust you. Instead, you choose to return to awareness. You pause before reacting. You listen for wisdom before you speak. You follow the path not because it's comforting, but because it's trustworthy. Emotionally, this brings stability. You no longer depend on feeling good to feel safe. You learn to rest in the truth of impermanence, knowing that even difficulty will pass. You begin to draw strength not from control, but from understanding. The Dharma becomes a mirror, a quiet guide, a steady friend. Then there is the refuge of Sangha, community of those who walk the path alongside you. This can be a group of practitioners, a circle of friends, a teacher, or even an inner sense of companionship. It is the reminder that you are not alone, that others are facing the same fears, doubts, and questions, that awakening is not a private journey. It is something shared, echoed, and supported in relationship. Taking refuge in the Sangha means allowing yourself to be seen. It means speaking honestly, listening deeply, and staying connected even when it's hard. It means asking for help without shame. It means letting others support your clarity without depending on them to save you. Emotionally, this refuge addresses the pain of isolation. When you practice alone for too long, you may start to believe your struggles are unique. You may feel ashamed of your doubts or discouraged by your pace. Sangha reminds you that there is nothing wrong with your process, that healing does not look the same for everyone, that your presence matters, even when your confidence wavers. At a deeper level, refuge in Sangha is also about the internal community, the different parts of yourself that learn to live in harmony. The inner critic, the wounded child, the protector, the wise observer. As you integrate, the internal war softens. These parts begin to relate to each other with compassion instead of conflict. Your whole inner system begins to feel more like a team and less like a battlefield. When the triple gem becomes a personal refuge, it stops being abstract. You turn toward the Buddha nature in you when you feel ashamed or lost. You turn toward the Dharma when you don't know what to do and want to remember what's wise. You turn toward the Sangha when you feel disconnected and long to belong. This kind of refuge is not about escaping the world. It is about being more fully in it-rooted, supported, guided. You carry the sanctuary with you. You carry it in the way you breathe, the way you choose, the way you return to awareness in the middle of pain. Some days, you'll forget. You'll follow old patterns. You'll numb or react or pretend. But refuge means you don't stay there. It means you remember the path and return, again and again, with patience. You begin to trust that there is something in you that doesn't get lost. Even when everything else falls apart, that stillness remains. You might practice touching the refuge with small rituals, bowing, lighting a candle, repeating the phrases, "I take refuge in the Buddha," "I take refuge in the Dharma," "I take refuge in the Sangha," not for performance, but for grounding. These words can become anchors when emotion rises or confusion spreads. They remind you that the path is alive and you are walking it. This inner refuge also teaches you how to offer safety to others. When you embody the triple gem, people around you begin to feel it. They feel less judged, more met. They feel your steadiness, not because you're perfect, but because you're rooted. You offer presence, not advice. Warmth, not solutions. Space, not pressure. Over time, the refuge becomes less about seeking and more about resting. You don't need to reach for it in crisis, because it's already inside you. Your mind trusts stillness. Your heart trusts kindness. Your life trusts the path. And from that trust, everything begins to shift, not dramatically, but deeply. Not loudly, but unshakably. You live your life not from fear, but from alignment. Not from striving, but from belonging. You stop reaching for safety outside and begin to embody it from within. This is what it means to take refuge, not to escape the storm, but to carry shelter with you into every moment. Not to abandon the world, but to meet it with the strength of one who knows they are held, guided, and never truly alone. Once you begin to feel held by something deeper than approval or performance, once the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are not just words but living supports you can lean into, something else becomes possible. You start to feel safe enough to come closer, not just to yourself, but to others. You begin to notice the patterns in how you connect, the places that still tighten when you're misunderstood, the moments you retreat without knowing why. Even as you deepen in awareness and inner refuge, relationship wounds still arise. And in those places, more than clarity or solitude, what's often most needed is gentleness. The next layer of practice is how you bring this inner work into connection, not by trying to fix relationships, but by showing up differently within them. This is where the Buddhist precepts become less about rules and more about restoration. Precepts are sometimes misunderstood as commandments or moral obligations, but in the Buddhist path, they are not about rigid morality. They are relational guidelines, invitations into deeper integrity, tools for alignment in human connection. They are not enforced from outside, they are cultivated from within. Their purpose is not to make you behave, but to help you stay in harmony with your own values, with others, and with the truth of the moment. When internalized as healing practices, the precepts become a way to relate to others without reenacting your old wounds. They give you structure for intimacy that does not require collapse. They teach you how to protect what matters most in relationships: trust, presence, and mutual care. The first precept, to refrain from harming living beings, includes not only physical harm, but emotional and energetic harm. It asks you to pause before reacting, to feel into the impact of your words and actions, to recognize when a pattern of defensiveness or blame is about to take over. In that pause, you begin to ask, is this response aligned with my deeper intention? Is this protecting connection or breaking it? This practice begins to rewire relationships that have been built on reactivity. It creates space for compassion where once there was only reaction. The second precept, to refrain from taking what is not freely given, applies not only to objects, but to attention, time, energy, and emotional labor. It invites you to respect boundaries, both spoken and subtle. In healing relationship wounds, this is profound. Often, past hurts arise from situations where consent was ignored, not just in the body, but in presence, in expectation, in communication. This precept helps you see where you may be pulling for validation, asking for care in ways that others cannot offer, or giving with the expectation of return. It encourages clarity over coercion, invitation over assumption. The third precept, to engage in sexual conduct with care and mindfulness, asks that intimacy be rooted in honesty, respect, and mutual well-being. This is not limited to physical intimacy. It speaks to the deeper desire to be known, to be touched emotionally, to be seen. When misunderstood or unmet, these desires can lead to manipulative dynamics. When met with clarity and tenderness, they become sources of deep connection. This precept helps create space for those conversations that often go unspoken. It allows you to move slowly, with intention, so that desire is not twisted by fear or urgency. The fourth precept, to refrain from false speech, is perhaps the most powerful in healing relational wounds. It invites honesty, not just in facts, but in intention. Are your words meant to reveal or protect? To connect or control? This includes self-deception, the ways you edit your truth to maintain closeness or avoid conflict. This precept encourages you to speak from your center, not from performance, but from presence. You learn to tell the truth with kindness and to receive truth without collapsing. The fifth precept, to refrain from intoxicants that cloud the mind, includes substances, but also includes patterns overthinking, distraction, emotional reactivity that pull you away from clear presence. In relationship, this precept asks, am I here, really? Am I engaging from clarity or from a fog of habit, fear, or addiction to approval? It invites you to return again and again to awareness, so that your connections are not filtered through distortion. When practiced gently, these precepts begin to repair what trauma has interrupted. They create a relational field that feels safe, not because it is perfect, but because it is anchored. You begin to relate not from your most defended self, but from the part of you that can stay present even when it hurts. You become less afraid of conflict because you trust your intention to remain kind. You become less dependent on agreement because you're not speaking to win, but to understand. One of the most powerful shifts this brings is the ability to be in disagreement without rupture. When your intention is clear, when your speech is honest, when your actions are respectful, connection can survive tension. This is the heart of relational wholeness, not constant harmony, but resilient presence. The precepts also offer support when you're the one who has caused harm. Instead of collapsing into guilt or defensiveness, you reflect, where did I step out of integrity? What fear was I reacting from? What needs were unmet? Then, from that reflection, you make amends not to erase what happened, but to restore trust. This kind of accountability is not about punishment, it's about repair. It teaches both you and the other person that harm can be acknowledged and connection can still hold. When you apply the precepts as relational practice, you also begin to notice your boundaries becoming more clear. You recognize when someone else is not meeting you from the same commitment to clarity or care. And instead of trying to change them or losing yourself, you step back not with judgment, but with respect for your own well-being. The precepts do not make you passive, they make you discerning. They also begin to shape your inner relationships. The way you talk to yourself softens. You stop using language that harms. You stop grabbing for attention inside your own mind through harshness or guilt. You treat your inner world with more care. Over time, this becomes natural. You don't need to discipline yourself into kindness. It arises on its own when you are aligned. This work is subtle. It doesn't always look dramatic on the surface, but inside, the shift is profound. The energy you once spent defending or managing relationships is now used for deep connection. You are no longer using others to feel whole. You are showing up whole to relate more fully. You also begin to feel safer being seen not just in your strengths, but in your rawness. Because you know you are showing up with integrity. You are not hiding behind politeness or pleasing. You are not abandoning yourself to keep peace. You are speaking and listening with intention. You are creating space for others to do the same. And when they can't, you grieve that honestly. You stop twisting yourself to be accepted where there is no room for truth. The precepts guide you back to connection without self-erasure. You learn that leaving a dishonest relationship can be as loving as staying in an honest one. Over time, the precepts become less like practices and more like qualities. You embody non-harming, not because you remember to, but because it feels right. You speak truth without rehearsing. You set boundaries without shame. You give and receive without confusion. Your relationships begin to reflect your inner work not through perfection, but through presence. This healing is not about becoming invulnerable. It is about becoming intimate with others and with yourself. The precepts don't protect you from pain. They support you through it. They remind you of what matters when it's easy to forget. They bring you back to alignment when emotion pulls you away. And so your connections become places of growth, not reenactment. Places where you feel both free and rooted, where you can love without losing yourself and stay without pretending. This is the freedom that relational practice offers. A life where wholeness is not something you protect, but something you share gently, honestly, fully. When relationships begin to feel less like battles and more like shared spaces for growth, something deeper settles in the body. You stop walking on eggshells. You stop bracing. You stop rehearsing your every word. You start to feel the effects of trust not only in your mind, but in your nervous system. Safety is no longer just a concept, it becomes a felt sense. And that shift from idea to embodiment marks a profound turning point in practice. All the insight in the world means little if it doesn't reach your tissues, your breath, your posture. This is where the path of awakening moves from theory into the body. This is the somatic Buddhist part of you that lives the teachings, not by reciting them, but by becoming them. The body is not a separate thing from practice. It is the ground of it. Long before the mind formed concepts or stories, the body felt everything. It recorded joy, tension, grief, relief. Every breath you held, every jaw you clenched, every time you flinched or froze, your body remembers. When you begin to meet the body as a site of awakening, you stop bypassing these imprints. You begin to heal in real time, in real space, with real sensation. Somatic presence starts with awareness, not abstract observation, but direct attention to the sensations that arise moment by moment. Temperature, texture, pressure, movement. You begin to notice where you habitually contract, where you go numb, where you check out. These moments become openings, not problems to fix, but doorways into deeper listening. The more you attend to your body with kindness, the more it speaks to you not in words, but in subtle cues. a tight chest that softens with an exhale, a tingling in the hands when something important is named, a sense of ease when you tell the truth. These are not random experiences. They are signs of integration. They show that your practice is landing, that the Dharma is not just a philosophy in your head, but a wisdom living in your cells. You don't need to explain these sensations. You need to trust them. And that trust grows every time you choose to feel, instead of think your way through life. Bringing awareness into the body also transforms how you experience emotional pain. Instead of collapsing into sadness or running from fear, you begin to locate where those emotions live in the body. You notice the tightness in your throat, the heaviness in your belly, the buzzing in your spine. You breathe into those places gently. You make room. And by doing so, you allow the emotion to move. What once felt like stuckness becomes flow. The energy of the emotion is not denied, it is metabolized. This process creates safety internally. Your body starts to trust that you won't abandon it in distress. You don't force it to be calm. You listen to what it needs. Sometimes that means rest. Sometimes movement. Sometimes sound. The more attuned you become, the more your body becomes a partner in healing, not just a vessel to carry your thoughts. This embodiment also deepens your understanding of impermanence. Thoughts may say that something will last forever, but your body knows differently. You feel tension rise and fall. You feel sensation shift with breath. You witness pain that once felt unbearable dissolve into warmth or spaciousness. These experiences do not need to be labeled as success. They are simply reminders that everything moves. Everything lives in cycles. This brings comfort, not through control, but through intimacy. Integrating the Dharma through the body also changes your posture. Not just physically, but energetically. You begin to stand with more ease. You stop collapsing into shame or puffing up into defense. Your spine holds you without effort. Your chest opens without exposure. Your presence becomes felt, even in silence. Others notice, even if they don't know why. This embodied presence also influences how you speak and listen. When you're grounded in your body, your words slow down. You pause more. You hear what's under the words being spoken. Your responses carry weight not because they're rehearsed, but because they come from stillness. This kind of communication heals without effort. It's not about being eloquent, it's about being real. Even your breath becomes a teacher. You notice how it shortens when you're anxious, how it deepens when you're connected. You stop trying to manipulate it. You follow it like a guide. You let it lead you back to center when your mind scatters. Over time, this becomes automatic. Your breath becomes the first place you return to, not your thoughts. Bringing Dharma into the body also helps to dismantle spiritual perfectionism. You stop chasing peak experiences. You start trusting what's real. You realize that the most profound awakenings often come in ordinary sensations. The feeling of your feet on the ground, the warmth in your palms, the release in your neck after letting go of tension you didn't know you were holding. These are not distractions, they are Dharma. Movement practices can support this process. Walking meditation, gentle stretching, somatic inquiry, even daily rituals like washing your hands or drinking tea. When done with awareness, these actions become sacred, not because of what they achieve, but because of how fully you meet them. This path also brings deep compassion for the body itself. You stop seeing it as something to fix or transcend. You begin to love it not in a superficial way, but in a devotional way. You thank it for carrying you through your hardest days. You listen when it asks for gentleness. You forgive it for holding pain it didn't choose. And as this relationship deepens, your sense of self begins to shift. You no longer define yourself by what you think. You begin to trust what you feel not as fact, but as information. Your identity becomes less rigid, more spacious, more rooted in lived experience. This makes you more resilient. When conflict arises, you feel your feet. When grief comes, you soften your belly. When anger flares, you breathe into your chest. You don't bypass the emotion. You contain it with presence. This containment doesn't suppress. It protects. It allows time for clarity to arise without adding harm. Over time, your body becomes the most honest part of your practice. It tells you when you're aligned. It tells you when you're pushing. It tells you when it's time to rest. You learn to listen. And in that listening, you return again and again to a deeper truth. Awakening is not an idea. It is something lived. This kind of integration cannot be taught through words alone. It must be practiced, felt, and remembered through your own flesh. Every time you bring awareness to sensation, you're building the path beneath your feet. Every time you stay with discomfort without abandoning yourself, you're rewiring your nervous system to trust presence over panic. And this trust is what allows deeper insight to take root. The kind of insight that doesn't just change how you think, but how you live. You don't need to explain the Dharma. You become it, in how you move, in how you breathe, in how you hold the people around you, not just physically, but energetically. This is the somatic Buddha, not a figure to bow to, but a presence to embody. You may still struggle. You may still forget. But your return becomes quicker. Your body becomes your anchor. Your practice becomes whole, not because you've mastered it, but because you've allowed it to touch every part of you, mind, heart, and body, fully, quietly, without leaving anything behind. When presence becomes something you feel through your skin, when each breath reconnects you to the ground beneath your feet, the idea of healing begins to transform. It's no longer about solving or fixing, but about returning to the body, to the breath, to this moment. Yet even in this intimacy, the world continues to ask for words. It fills the space with noise, with reaction, with endless reaching. But underneath all of it, there is something more ancient than language, more whole than thought. A space where nothing needs to be explained. A space that doesn't ask for performance. That space is silence. Silence is often misunderstood. It is mistaken for withdrawal, for distance, for emptiness. But true silence, what Buddhist practice calls noble silences, not absence. It is presence, without interference. It is not quiet because there's nothing happening. It is quiet because nothing needs to be added. Silence in this way is not passive. It is deeply active. It listens, it holds, it heals. When you've lived in survival mode, the absence of noise can feel unsettling. Silence might trigger old fear of being ignored, of being unseen, of having nothing left to prove your place in the world. This is why noble silence is a practice, not a retreat from life, but a deep re-entry into what is real. When you learn to stay, to soften, and to listen in the absence of words, you start to notice the deeper layers of your being, the ones that don't scream for attention, the ones that speak only when the noise subsides. Healing through silence requires trust, not in silence itself, but in your capacity to meet what arises within it. Because when the distractions fall away, what's left are the parts of you still waiting to be met. Old grief, lingering tension, tenderness that never had space to breathe. These aspects of self do not need to be analyzed, they need to be allowed. Silence gives them that permission. The mind will often try to fill silence with planning, remembering, analyzing. That is natural. The habit of constant thought is strong. But the invitation is not to stop thought. It's to step back from needing to follow it. When you sit in silence and allow the mind to move without clinging, something changes. You begin to hear the gaps between thoughts. You begin to feel what lives beneath the narrative. Those gaps are not empty. They are full of clarity, full of sensation, full of presence. And in that presence, healing happens not because you understand something new, but because you've stopped reinforcing what is no longer true. You've stopped repeating the story of urgency, of lack, of self-judgment. You've allowed something else to come forward, something quieter, something whole. This doesn't require long retreats or hours of seated meditation. It begins in small ways, in choosing to pause before replying, in walking without headphones, in letting silence live in conversation without rushing to fill it, in staying with a difficult emotion without naming it right away. These are simple, radical acts that restore nervous system balance, that remind the body it does not need to defend itself every second of the day. Silence also helps you reconnect with inner rhythms. When the external world is loud, it becomes easy to ignore your body's cues. Hunger, fatigue, emotional, get drowned out by noise. But when you enter silence with intention, these signals become audible again. You begin to notice the pace your body wants to move at. You begin to hear what your heart has been trying to say. This kind of listening changes the way you relate. You speak less to impress and more to connect. You stop rehearsing responses while someone else is speaking. You let their words land. You let silence punctuate the exchange. In this way, silence becomes part of the dialogue. It creates space for truth to surface not just from the mind, but from the body, from intuition. Noble silence is also a protection. It guards your energy from scattering. It holds your attention in one place long enough for depth to emerge. In silence, you are not performing. You are not seeking approval. You are not proving anything. This frees up immense internal resources that were once spent managing your image. The nervous system begins to shift from defense to ease. You start to feel the difference between performing calm and actually being calm. Silence is not about withdrawal from connection. It's about preparing for deeper connection. When you return from silence, you return more attuned, more available, more anchored. Your words carry more weight because they are not covering over discomfort. They are expressions of clarity. In practice, silence can also reveal the places where you rely on control, the way you interrupt discomfort with noise, the way you avoid stillness because of what it might uncover. Seeing these patterns is not failure. It is the beginning of integration. Silence doesn't require that you be fearless, only that you stay long enough to meet yourself without fleeing. Over time, the nervous system begins to associate silence not with danger, but with safety. You begin to crave it not as an escape, but as nourishment, a return to center, a space where nothing has to be managed, where the breath, the body, and the moment are enough. Silence also restores a sense of proportion. When overwhelmed, the mind often magnifies problems, loops through imagined scenarios, tightens around worst-case outcomes. But in silence, you begin to see how most suffering is mental construction. You begin to discern what is real and what is projection. This clarity doesn't deny pain. It just stops feeding the parts of it that are optional. You learn to sit with discomfort without needing immediate resolution. You stop interrupting your growth process just to feel better for a moment. Silence teaches patience not as a forced virtue, but as a natural result of presence. You begin to trust that answers will come when they are ready, that some things unfold on their own when not forced. In this way, noble silence becomes a regenerative force. It restores what constant stimulation drains. It grounds what chronic striving disturbs. It reconnects what busyness splits apart. You don't need to change anything for this to happen. You simply need to stop adding for long enough to let balance return. Silence also reveals what is already working. You begin to notice the parts of your life that bring ease, the patterns that support well-being, the relationships that feel mutual, These insights come not from evaluation, but from felt sense. You begin to trust what your body has known all along. This trust extends into action. Silence does not make you passive, it makes you precise. You speak when there is something real to say. You act when the time is right. You are no longer driven by reactivity. You are moved by alignment. That shift in motivation changes everything, not just in how you relate to others, but in how you carry yourself. Silence is also how wisdom matures. Teachings heard 100 times may not land until they are felt in stillness. Insight ripens when it is not chased. You don't need more information. You need space for what you already know to integrate. Noble silence can be taken formally in practice, but it can also be held internally. You can choose not to speak unnecessarily. You can refrain from explaining yourself when it is not needed. You can give up the compulsion to narrate your experience as it happens. This restraint is not repression, it is refinement. It teaches you that presence is stronger than explanation, that connection does not depend on constant expression, that your value is not in your words, but in your being. The more you trust this, the more resilient you become, because silence teaches you how to be with yourself fully, not just the parts you like, but the whole, the raw, the uncertain. And in doing so, it teaches you how to be with others without needing them to soothe or distract you. Silence is not the absence of meaning. It is the space where meaning finds you, not because you chased it down, but because you made room. And so you learn to return to it not once, but daily, not only in solitude, but in the middle of life, in a pause before a response, in a breath before a decision, in the gap between thought and reaction. You learn to live with silence as a companion, not a void, as a guide, not an escape, as the place you come home to, not because you are lost, but because you are finally ready to listen. When silence is no longer something to escape, when you begin to trust it as nourishment instead of absence, your relationship to desire begins to shift. The inner noise that once masked deeper truths quiets down, and into that space, something raw and undeniable begins to emerge. Craving. Not the obvious craving for things or attention, but the subtle pull that seems to whisper underneath every restless thought. A wanting that doesn't always have a clear object. A reaching that says, this moment is not quite enough. Even in stillness, the mind finds ways to grasp. It looks for what's next. It waits for what's better. But what happens when you stop trying to push craving away and instead turn toward it with compassion? What happens when enough is no longer a finish line but a place you learn to stand in? Craving, or tanha, is one of the most central teachings in Buddhist thought. It is often described as the root of suffering, but understanding craving is not the same as rejecting it. The impulse to crave is deeply human. It arises from contact, from perception, from memory. The problem is not that we want. The problem is when we cling. When the mind believes it cannot rest until the object of desire is attained, or until discomfort is completely removed. To relate to craving skillfully, you must first stop moralizing it. Craving is not evidence of failure. It is not proof that you are not advanced enough in your practice. It is simply the natural response of a system that once learned to associate certain conditions with safety, with love, with identity. That system does not need shame. It needs to be seen. It needs understanding. And it needs to be met without force. Releasing craving does not mean cutting yourself off from life. It means letting go of the belief that your well-being depends on the next thing. Whether that thing is a person, a feeling, a resolution, or a new version of yourself. The art of enough is not about settling. It is about seeing clearly. Enough is what arises when the heart stops grasping, not because it was told to, but because it no longer believes it must. To get there, You start by noticing how craving shows up in your experience. Not just in big moments, but in the small ways the mind says, "Not yet." It shows up in the scroll through your phone, the way you add one more task before resting, the inner voice that says, "This isn't it." Craving often hides behind productivity, behind restlessness, behind self-improvement. You don't need to fight these urges. You need to see them, name them gently, and ask, what is this wanting really pointing toward? Often, craving is trying to protect something tender, a fear of being left behind, a longing to feel whole, a wish to be seen. When you meet the craving with attention, you begin to hear the vulnerable voice beneath it. That voice doesn't need to be silenced. It needs to be held. You don't overcome craving by repressing it. You outgrow its urgency by meeting its root. This meeting happens in the body, not just in the mind. Craving has a texture. It lives in the jaw, in the hands, in the chest. When you feel the pull to reach or grasp, pause. Find the place it lives in you. Stay there without flinching. Bring breath into that space. Soften your response. This doesn't make the desire go away, but it brings space. Space breaks the cycle of compulsion. The body often knows when enough has arrived, but the mind may not listen. It is trained to seek more clarity, more validation, more comfort. To learn the art of enough, you must start building trust in the body's signals, the exhale that deepens, the shoulders that release, the jaw that loosens. These are signs of sufficiency. They are real. They are worth honoring. Craving can also be deceptive. It may appear as hope or motivation, but the difference lies in energy. When action is rooted in clarity, it feels spacious. When it's rooted in craving, it feels desperate. One moves you forward, the other pulls you in circles. You learn to feel the difference, not by thinking, but by sensing. Craving shrinks the moment. It says, "Not this." The path of enough says, "Let's stay here just a little longer." You also begin to shift how you relate to pleasure. The practice is not to avoid it, but to stop clinging to it. You enjoy what arises without needing it to last. You taste joy without fearing its end. You find peace in the middle of change because you stop believing that satisfaction must be permanent to be real. You meet pleasure as it is, momentary, beautiful, and free. This also transforms how you pursue goals. You still create, you still move, but your effort is rooted in presence, not pressure. You act because it aligns, not because it fills a hole. This makes your actions cleaner, less about proving, more about offering. You do not need the result to validate your worth. You've already touched what is enough. Even in relationships, craving often plays out silently. You may seek reassurance, attention, closeness. These are not wrong, but when they come from fear, they distort the connection. You begin to monitor instead of trust. You ask without clarity. The path of enough means you learn to give space, not out of detachment, but out of respect for your own inner steadiness and for theirs. When you feel the ache of not enough, instead of rushing to satisfy it, pause. Let it speak. Let it rise. Let it show you the places inside that still feel unseen. Then ask what it would mean to stay, to feel that longing without needing it resolved. Sometimes what's needed is not a solution, but a witness. You can be that witness. You can be the one who stays. Over time, this practice builds a new kind of stability. You no longer depend on external highs to feel okay. You can walk through loss without being undone. You can meet uncertainty without gripping. You can feel hunger and not feed it with confusion. This is not control. It's maturity. It's the capacity to be with life as it is, not as you wish it would be. The teachings do not say that all desire is bad. They say that when desire turns into clinging, into tanha, suffering follows. The work is not to stop wanting. It is to let go of the idea that you are incomplete until the desire is fulfilled. You are not incomplete. You are unfolding. Craving says you are missing something. Wisdom says you are remembering something. And what you are remembering is this: the heart can be full even when the hands are empty. The breath can be whole even in the middle of grief. The moment can be complete even without resolution. This is not a mindset. It is a lived truth, discovered slowly through attention. To support this path, you can use simple daily practices. Begin your day with the phrase, "I have enough for now." Say it not as a limitation, but as a ground. Return to it when you feel the pull of grasping. Breathe into it. Let it settle in your bones. It does not mean you will never reach, never grow, never create. It means you will stop believing that fulfillment exists only in what comes next. You may still forget. Craving is persistent, but you will remember more quickly. You will return more gently, and each return will reinforce the truth. You are allowed to rest in what is already here. You are allowed to pause before reaching. You are allowed to feel full even without more. This kind of freedom is not loud. It is not dramatic, but it is lasting. It builds a life rooted in presence, not pursuit, in ease, not exhaustion, in reverence, not rush. You stop trying to fill every space and begin to honor the silence between. That space is not lacking, it is sacred. The art of enough is not a denial of desire. It is a recognition that your true home is not at the end of craving, but in the breath that meets it, the body that holds it. The awareness that stays present through all of it, gently whispering, "You are not waiting to begin. You are already here." When the grip of craving loosens and the mind begins to rest in sufficiency, something unexpected begins to stir beneath the surface. Without the usual chase for more, space opens space that is not empty but filled with possibility. In that space, what has been long held and long protected starts to rise. Roles, masks, personas, the inner scaffolding built over time to feel worthy or safe. These identities once served you. They helped you belong. They made life feel predictable. But now, in this quiet, some of them feel too tight. What protected you before may no longer fit the person you're becoming. This isn't a failure, it's a transition, a gentle ending. One that asks not for destruction, but for grace. This is where ego death becomes something tender, not terrifying. Letting identities dissolve is not about erasing yourself. It's about making space for what is real to emerge. Ego, in the Buddhist sense, isn't just pride or arrogance. It is the sense of a fixed self, one that clings to continuity, control, and certainty. But the truth of life is change. The truth of being is impermanence. The idea of a fixed self resists this, and in doing so, creates suffering. Not because the self is bad, but because clinging to it limits what you can feel, how you can grow, and where you can go. Most ego deaths are not sudden, they are subtle. A role begins to feel exhausting. A belief about yourself stops making sense. A reaction pattern no longer brings relief. These are signs that something is ready to fall away, not to be rejected or judged, but to be thanked and released. It's not about attacking the ego, it's about making room for who you are without the armor. To support this, presence is everything. You begin to observe yourself gently. You notice where you tighten when someone disagrees with you. You feel the tension rise when you're not praised. You catch the panic when an old title or label no longer applies. These are not flaws. They are signals that a part of you has been holding on too long. That part needs compassion, not correction. When an identity dissolves, grief often follows. Even if that identity was painful, It gave you something to hold on to. Letting it go creates a kind of groundlessness. This is natural. The sense of, "I don't know who I am anymore," is not a crisis. It's a doorway. The key is not to fill it too quickly with a new label or story. The practice is to stay with the space that opens, to let yourself be unfamiliar, undefined, undone. This takes courage, not dramatic bravery, but quiet strength, the kind that allows confusion without shutting down, the kind that stays open even when certainty fades. In Buddhism, this process is not about erasing the self, but seeing through its illusion. You begin to experience the self as a set of conditions shaped by culture, memory, emotion, thought. None of it solid, all of it changing. From this perspective, letting go of identity becomes less about loss and more about freedom. You realize you don't need to keep proving who you are. You don't need to keep reinforcing an image that no longer serves you. You begin to move with more fluidity, less defense, more presence. These shifts can happen in small, everyday ways. You speak less to impress. You stop performing confidence when you feel unsure. You ask questions instead of pretending to know. You allow your opinions to change. You notice when you're clinging to being the helpful one, the strong one, the wise one. And in those moments, you pause, you breathe, you soften your grip. Sometimes the identity that's falling away is one formed in trauma, the survivor, the overachiever, the one who never asks for help. These roles were necessary once. They carried you through pain. But you're allowed to grow beyond them. You're allowed to become someone who doesn't need to carry everything alone. Letting these identities die does not mean forgetting what shaped you. It means releasing the belief that you are only that shape, that your worth depends on holding it together. When the self becomes less fixed, compassion grows. You stop seeing others through rigid lenses too. You allow them to evolve. You forgive them for changing. You become less reactive to their defenses because you recognize your own. This process is not always gentle, even when approached with care. Sometimes it feels like confusion. Sometimes it feels like loss. But every time you let something fall away, something more honest arises. Not better, just more true, more responsive to the moment, not tied to the past. And while it may feel like you are becoming less, you are actually becoming more whole. Not more consistent, but more real. The Dharma does not promise a perfect version of you. It offers the possibility of freedom from the burden of perfection. It invites you to see that who you are is not a thing to be defended, but a process to be lived. This is where emotional safety becomes essential. Ego death must be held in compassion. The nervous system must feel secure enough to loosen control. The body must trust that softening will not lead to danger. This is why presence, breath, and embodiment are central. You don't transcend the body to let go of ego. You anchor in the body so that the letting go feels safe. Ritual can support these transitions. Writing a letter to an identity you're ready to release. Thanking it for what it offered. Naming the ways it protected you. Honoring what it cost you. And then, in your own time, letting it go. This isn't performance. It's closure. It marks the shift from unconscious clinging to conscious release. Community helps too. Safe spaces where you can say, "I don't know who I am right now," and still be loved. Spaces where transformation is not pathologized, but respected. We are not meant to deconstruct alone. We need mirrors that don't demand we stay the same. As you continue this practice, you may notice that you feel lighter, more open, less rushed to arrive. You begin to trust that you don't have to know exactly who you are in every moment. You can simply show up, meet what's here, and respond with care. This is not erasure of self. It is intimacy with change. The art of gentle ego death is learning to release without collapse. to loosen without losing integrity, to shed without shame. It is walking through small deaths with presence so that something new, something more aligned, can be born. And over time, you discover that what remains after these gentle deaths is not absence. It is clarity, not an empty shell, but a living center, one that doesn't cling to identity, but moves with life. One that doesn't grasp at being someone, but trusts the unfolding. This is not an end, it is a return, not to a fixed version of yourself, but to the fluid essence underneath it all, the part of you that can hold change without fear, the part that knows that every ending carries within it the shape of something beginning. And in that knowing, you find peace, not because you've defined yourself perfectly, but because you've finally stopped trying. You've allowed yourself to become who you are, not once, but over and over, with softness, with breath, and with grace. You've just walked through teachings not meant to impress the world, but to restore you gently, deeply, honestly. You've touched the power of soft awareness, the warmth of reparenting your forgotten self, the sacred stillness of pause, the release of craving, and the quiet joy of letting go. You've remembered that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it rests in silence. Sometimes it looks like saying, I don't need to be more to belong to myself. This journey isn't about becoming someone else. It's about coming home breath by breath, lesson by lesson, the person you never stopped being underneath it all, not by force, not by perfection, but by returning again and again with kindness. And now, it's your turn to offer something back. Leave a comment below and write, I am learning to rest in wholeness. Let this be more than a sentence. Let it be your soft commitment to yourself, to pause, to breathe, to return. And if this journey spoke to you quietly, subscribe to the channel. There's more waiting for you here. Not more noise, but more of what matters. You don't have to do this alone. We walk gently, together.